Picture a ship. Not a cruise ship with a pool deck and a buffet and a climbing wall shaped like a rock formation. Not a container ship with refrigerated units stacked 8 high carrying frozen fries to Rotterdam. A wooden sailing ship, 3 masts, maybe 130 feet long, built before you were born and showing every one of those years in the way old things show them. Comprehensively, without apology, in ways that inspire very little confidence when you're standing on the deck watching the North Sea decide what it thinks of you. Now pack it with 200 people who left everything they had, not because they wanted an adventure, not because they were bored, because things at home have become so bad, so specifically and completely bad, that the idea of crossing an ocean in a wooden box and ending up in a country where nobody speaks your language, and you know nobody, and you have 11 coins and an address written on a piece of paper, that idea had started to seem not just acceptable, but genuinely the better option. Add the smell. That's always the first thing. The smell of 200 people who haven't bathed properly in 6 weeks. The smell of salt water and rope tar and the particular sourness of bilge water working its way up through the timber. The smell of dried fish and rye bread, and the faint animal smell of the livestock that crossed on the previous voyage and left their ghost in the wood grain of the decks. Below the waterline in steerage, you can hear children crying in the dark. Not because anything specific has happened, because they are small and it is dark, and the ship is moving and everything is unfamiliar in the specific total way that 6-year-olds cannot articulate and cannot bear. This sound comes up through the floorboards and mixes with the creak of the rigging and the rhythmic conversation of waves against the hull. This is the world the Hamburger comes from, not from a golden arch, not from a man in a paper hat with a stopwatch, not from a California parking lot in 1948, though we'll get there. The Hamburger comes from hunger and ships and the particular genius of people who had nothing except the knowledge of what they used to eat, which they carried across the Atlantic the way people carry the most important things, not in a bag, but in the body. We're going back there tonight. Not as food historians marking items off a timeline. We're living it. We're going to follow the Hamburger from a port in Germany, where a labourer is eating the best thing he's had in weeks, through the noise and smell of the immigrant streets of New York, through a hot August day at a Wisconsin county fair, where something obvious is about to be noticed for the first time, through the white-tiled kitchen of a restaurant in Wichita that is trying to sell you trust instead of food, all the way to a California parking lot where a 52-year-old salesman stands in the summer heat and understands in the time it takes to look at a line of people that he is looking at the future of America. I make these history stories, and I'm genuinely never sure what you're doing while you listen, whether you're actually trying to sleep or whether you are a person who has simply decided that the history of ground beef between bread is the specific thing you want accompanying you into unconsciousness tonight. Either way, honestly, same. Get comfortable. Put the screen face down if you can manage it. Here we go. Hamburg in 1847 smells like the end of the world, and not in the dramatic sense, in the very literal, very municipal sense. The harbour is grey-brown water the colour of wet clay, and everything that floats on it has been stained the same colour, because the Elbe is doing what rivers that run through industrial cities do, which is accept everything and disclose nothing, carrying its load of tannery runoff and soap factory discharge, and the general effluent of a city that has been a trading port for 700 years and has never developed strong feelings about what it dumps in the river. The fish market at the foot of the Landungsbrücken opens at 5 in the morning. The smell opens at about 4. It is a low wall of salt and guts and cold ammonia that moves across the eastern part of the city before dawn, announcing itself, and you have been here for 3 months and you're almost used to it, which is the remarkable adaptive capacity of the human nose operating under sustained conditions. You came from a village in Württemberg. You're 22 years old, and your name is Karl Bauer, and your father is dead of a fever he caught 3 winters ago, and your mother has 6 other children, including 2 who are young enough to need watching all day. And the blight that has been moving through European potato crops for 2 years now has reached Württemberg in a serious way this autumn, and you had 11 silver coins and your brother-in-law Friedrich's address in Hamburg, and you left. Friedrich lives in the Gängeviertel. The Gängeviertel is what Hamburg does not look at too directly. Dense timber frame buildings from the last 2 centuries, the newer ones built on top of the older foundations, so everything tilts slightly, the way old cities tilt when they build without enough horizontal references. The alleys between the buildings are narrow enough that you can reach from your window and touch the building across from you, which people do because this is faster than going downstairs and around. The smell of the Gängeviertel is separate from the harbour smell. It is an interior smell, the smell of families in close spaces, of cabbage soup cooking on shared stoves, of laundry that has not fully dried because there is not enough space and not enough sun. Friedrich is at the docks. Most men in the Gängeviertel are at the docks, or waiting to be at the docks, or thinking about the docks in that particular way that people think about the only available source of income. You wait in the mornings with several hundred other men in a space near the water, and the foreman walks along the line and points, and if he points at you, then you have work today. And if he doesn't, you go back to Friedrich's room and try not to eat anything you don't have to eat. He points at you about 4 days in 7. You're not sure why those particular days. You have not identified the pattern. You have tried to look willing and capable and not desperate, which is a complicated performance when you are in fact desperate. But the foreman does not explain his selections and you do not ask. On the days he points at you, you work the docks. This means moving things. Bales of raw cotton from American ships, barrels of tobacco, crates of sugar from Caribbean plantations that pass through Hamburg on their way to somewhere else, because Hamburg is the city that things pass through on their way to somewhere else, which is what makes it a port and what makes the smell what it is. You work from 5 in the morning until 7 or 8 in the evening when the light goes, or until the tide dictates that the unloading must stop and wait for the water to do what the water needs to do. 11 hours, sometimes more. The weight of the bales is not consistent, which is the part that surprises you most about the work. You expected something uniform, and instead you get variety in the worst possible way. A bale that is lighter than you braced for and you stumble, and a bale that is heavier than you expected, and your back informs you of this immediately in language that is not ambiguous. Your hands, after 3 months of this, are different from the hands you arrived with. The calluses have their own texture now. The knuckles have learned to crack in the morning in a specific sequence. Your grip has changed in a way you notice when you try to write a letter home, which you do once a month. The letters travelling slowly back to Württemberg with the news that you are alive and working and saving. And on the evening of October the 6th, 1847, after an 11-hour day loading bales of English wool from a merchant brig out of Bristol, the foreman hands you something. You look at it. Bread. Dense, dark rye bread. The colour of old wood. The kind that will last a week without going bad because the whole process of its making seems designed to produce something impervious to change. And on top of the bread, or rather pressed between two thick pieces of it, something else. Meat. Minced beef. Pressed flat. Fried in its own fat on a hot iron surface until the outside has gone dark at the edges and the fat has crisped, and the middle is still pink-grey in a way that tells you it cooked fast and got off the heat before the centre quite finished. Quite. There are onions, thin-sliced, translucent and brown from the fat. There is salt, present enough to announce itself but not so much as to be the point. There is something dark and fermented underneath it all that you cannot identify, but that your stomach recognizes as protein and receives with immediate enthusiasm. The bread is warm at the edges where it has been pressed against the meat. The meat releases heat into your palm through the bread. You eat it standing up, back against a dock piling, the harbour wind coming in from the west off the Elbe, the smell of the river, and the smell of the wool still on your shirt, and the smell of this food all arriving at the same time, and the combination of them being, in this moment, exactly right. It tastes like nothing you've had in 4 months, not because it is sophisticated, it is the opposite of sophisticated. Every choice in its making has been made on the basis of efficiency and cost, and the specific requirements of feeding large numbers of hungry men quickly in the middle of a working day. The beef is from the parts that don't sell as steaks. The bread is yesterday's, or the day before's, dense enough to survive. The onions are cheap and caloric, and they fry in the same fat as the meat, which means they cost almost nothing because the fat was already being generated. The result is not elegant. The result is exactly what you need. You finish it in 4 bites. The last bite takes the final piece of bread, which has absorbed the fat and the onion and the salt, and has become, in the 5 minutes it has been in contact with those things, something different from what it was when the cook put it there, something softer and more yielding, something that stays with you. You stand at the piling for another minute after you've finished, looking at the harbour going dark, at the masts of the Bristol ship, at the lights coming on in the buildings that line the dockside, at the other men eating their own portions of the same thing, all of them standing, all of them leaning against something, all of them with that particular silence of people who have been working too long, to talk now that they have a minute to stop. This is Hamburg steak. Nobody is calling it that yet. This is just what you eat at the Hamburg docks in 1847, when the shift is long, and the foreman is paying for your supper. It has no name. It doesn't need one. It is beef between bread with onions, and it is the cheapest combination of calorie-dense foods that a cook can assemble in under 3 minutes, and it is going to follow you to the other side of the world. That's the thing about food made for hungry people doing hard work. It doesn't need to be fancy to be unforgettable. It just needs to be warm and filling, and to arrive at exactly the moment when you've started wondering if you'll make it to the end of the day. When the food answers that question, when the answer is yes, you will, here is the proof of it. Hot and pressing into your hands, that food becomes the food you remember. That food becomes the food you carry. You will carry this across an ocean. The port of Hamburg in 1847 is one of the 3 busiest trading ports in the world, which would mean more to you if you understood the wider world. But mostly what it means is there is always something arriving or departing. Always another ship in the roads waiting for a berth. Always another hold that needs to be emptied or filled. The cattle market is 2 streets north of the harbour, and you smell it before you see it on your first day in the city. That dense animal smell of livestock in quantity, and you learn quickly that this smell means there will be beef at the dock canteens, not the good cuts, Not the cuts that go to the butchers in the Neustadt who serve the merchants and the factors and the people with money for properly hung beef, but the cuts that nobody else wants. The heel and the shank and the plate, the working muscle of working animals, tough as rope and cheap as dirt. You grind those cuts because you cannot chew them otherwise. You bind them with fat and salt. You fry them fast and hot. Between 1840 and 1880, 5 million Germans will leave for America through this port and ports like it. They will take almost nothing in their hands, but they will carry what they know how to eat. The way you carry all the things that matter most. Not in a bag, but in the body, in the muscle memory of how a meal should be assembled, in the tongue's record of what satisfying tastes like. The cattle market is 2 streets north of the harbour, and you learn its hours before you learn much else about Hamburg, because the cattle market determines the beef supply, and the beef supply determines what gets served at the dock canteens, which determines whether the next 11 hours of loading bales end with something warm in your hands or with the particular hollow energy of a body that has worked on insufficient fuel. The Hamburg cattle market in 1847 is a specific kind of noise and smell. The animals come from the northern German plains and from as far as Denmark, and they arrive on foot, which means they arrive tired and thin from the walking, which means they arrive cheap. The farmers who bring them have been walking for days also, and they arrive with a particular patience of men who have timed their journey to the market calendar and know that whatever price they get today is the price, because the next market is 2 weeks away, and the cattle have to eat between now and then. The dealers know this. The dealers work the mathematics of the arrival. How tired, how thin, how long the farmer has been on the road, how many beasts he brought, and how many he needs to sell today versus how many he can afford to take home. A farmer with a dozen cattle and 2 weeks of feed for only 6 of them will sell differently than a farmer with 6 cattle and comfortable margins. The dealers know which is which. They have been reading cattle and farmers for their entire professional lives. The beef that comes out of this market and into the dock canteens is not the beef that anyone with a choice would buy. It is the shin and the plate, and the heel and the neck, the cuts that have spent their lives in motion, that have been doing the work of moving the animal from the Danish border to the Hamburg market, that have a density and toughness that comes from being used rather than from being bred for tenderness. This beef, if you try to slice it and fry it like a steak, would give you something that required serious conviction to chew. But if you grind it, the muscle fibres break down into something uniform and workable. If you mix the lean muscle with the fat that runs between the muscles, the rough yellow fat of a working animal, not the white marbled fat of a pampered one, but fat nonetheless, you get a mixture that coheres when pressed and cooks to a specific yielding texture that the unground muscle could never achieve. The cook who figured this out, there must have been a cook who figured this out, though history does not record their name, was not solving an aesthetic problem. They were solving a cost problem and a time problem simultaneously, which is where the most durable food innovations come from. Not from someone trying to make something delicious, but from someone trying to make something edible and fast and cheap, and discovering that the combination produces something that is, incidentally, also quite good. The dock workers know this food. They've been eating versions of it their whole lives, in the ports and on the farms and in the cities, where working people's food is always this. The parts that nobody else wanted, prepared with the ingenuity that necessity produces, seasoned with the only universal seasoning that working people have always had access to, which is hunger. Hunger makes almost everything better. You know this from the harbour piling. You know it from the specific taste of the Hamburg steak on October 6th, 1847, which was not merely the food itself, but the food after 11 hours of loading English wool, which means the food arriving at a body that has been running on morning bread and water since 5 in the morning, and has been spending those hours in sustained physical labour that burns more per hour than most activities a body can do. The Hamburg steak was not extraordinary. You were extraordinary, and the steak met you at a specific moment of your extraordinariness, which is what good food does. It arrives at the right time. You are going to spend the rest of your life knowing that something that simple can produce that particular experience of, yes, this is what I needed. This is the thing I did not know I was missing until I had it. You're going to carry this knowing across an ocean. You begin saving for a boat ticket in November of 1847. By October of 1848, you have enough. The ship is called the Johanna. It is a brig, two-masted, built in 1831, about 130 feet from bow to stern. It has been repitched twice, and it shows in the hull seams, which have been caulked more times than is ideal, and which you look at more carefully than you probably should on the morning you board. Standing in line at the dock with your single bag and your ticket, and the particular expression of someone who has made a decision and is committed to it, but would still like the decision to be objectively the right one. The Johanna smells below decks of bilge water and old wood and livestock from the previous crossing, and the particular concentrated human smell of several hundred people who have crossed an Atlantic Ocean in these same lower berths. The smell reaches you at the top of the companionway before you can see anything. Steerage means below the waterline. Your berth is a shelf of wood 18 inches wide. The person below you is close enough that you can hear their breathing during the night. The person above you is close enough that their movements come through the wood into your spine. You share this space with 147 other steerage passengers, none of whom you know. The cooking arrangement is 2 iron stoves on the deck above, and a rotor system that gives you access to heat once every 3 days, which means you cook what you have cooked when your turn comes, and you eat the rest cold. What you have is hardtack, which is dried salt fish, which is smoked sausage that will last approximately 2 weeks before it begins asking questions, which is dried peas in a cloth bag that you will boil when your stove time comes. The first 3 days are manageable. The North Sea in November is not manageable. The Johanna rolls in swells that are not dramatic the way storms in films are dramatic, but which are continuous and grinding and relentless. The kind of motion that does not give your body time to adapt because it never pauses, never offers a moment of stillness from which to recalibrate. The cooking stoves are closed. The hatch to steerage is sealed against the weather. The bucket situation becomes immediately and completely critical, and you will spend the rest of your life not describing the bucket situation in detail to anyone. What you think about instead, lying in your berth with the hull groaning around you and the North Sea doing what it will do. What you think about when thinking about anything other than discomfort seems like a viable option is food. Not the food you have with you, which is not improving with time. Food you remember. The Hamburg steak from the dock foreman. The specific heat of it in your hands in the harbour wind. The fat absorbed into the bread. The onion smell cutting through the brine. The human brain under sustained discomfort goes to food with a consistency that is almost comic. You will notice, in the long nights, that this is true of most of the people around you. Not everyone is sick. or not everyone is sick at the same time, and in the hours when the worst of it eases slightly, when there are clusters of people who can sit up and breathe and look at each other, the conversation goes to food. Always to food. A woman from the Rhineland tells her husband about the bread she will bake when they have an oven. A man from Bavaria describes a roast pork in such specific detail that you can almost smell it. The crackling skin and the juniper, and the meat falling from the bone. An older couple from Saxony speak quietly about something called Sauerbraten, a pot roast marinated in vinegar for 3 days, and the way they say it, in hushed voices, you understand that this dish is not merely food to them, it is a location. It is the place called home that they have just decided to leave forever. The Johanna stops being a ship at some point during the second week, not literally. It continues to float and to move and to make the sounds that wooden ships make when they are being asked to cross an ocean in November, which are creaking and groaning and the specific knock of water against the hull that has different registers depending on the angle and weight of the wave, and you come to learn these registers the way you come to learn any language under immersive conditions, which is imperfectly, partially, at the level of basic survival comprehension. What the Johanna stops being is a conveyance and becomes instead a world. This is the psychological fact of a long ocean crossing that nobody who hasn't experienced it can fully predict. The loss of the sense that there is somewhere else to be. In the first days, you are aware of where you came from and where you're going, and of the ship as a vehicle moving between those two fixed points. But fixed points require the ability to perceive them, and the horizon at sea in November shows you nothing fixed, shows you only the horizon, which recedes at the same rate that you approach it, which means you're always at the centre of the same circle, and the circle moves with you, and nothing you do changes this. By the third week, Hamburg is a collection of smells remembered in a specific order: fish and rope tar, and the sour density of the Gangviertel. By the fourth week, it is a collection of sounds: Friedrich's voice, the specific creak of the third-floor landing on the staircase, the pre-dawn noise of a city that never fully sleeps. By the fifth week, it is mostly just Karl Bauer eating minced beef at a harbour piling in the cold, the heat of the bread through the bread, the fat of the beef that smelled like, yes, you will get there, you will get there. In steerage in November, the certainty is not always easy to locate, not because the ship is in danger, not because the crossing is unusually bad, but because the body under sustained physical discomfort loses its confidence in future states. The cold and the motion and the smell and the insufficient food and the very limited movement available. All of these work together to produce in the body a state of low-level siege, a sense that what exists is what will continue to exist, that the ship is the world, and the world has always been this, and there is nothing past the horizon except more horizon. The people around you manage this differently. The older couple from Saxony, the ones who spoke quietly about Sauerbraten on the third evening, have developed a routine. Every morning at approximately the same time, regardless of the motion or the weather, or how the previous night has been, they sit up in their berths together and say something to each other in low voices, too low for you to hear across the steerage, and then they are quiet for a few minutes, and then they move. The routine is their anchor, something they can do every morning that makes the morning different from the night, that tells the body, time is passing, even when it does not feel like it. You develop your own version. You think about what you will eat when you arrive, not abstractly, specifically. Schreiber the butcher on Avenue B will feed you on the first night, Friedrich said. Schreiber is from Württemberg. Schreiber will know what you need after 8 weeks on a ship. You construct this meal in your mind with the specificity of someone who has nothing else to work with. The minced beef, pressed flat, in the cast iron pan. The onions, thin sliced, softening in the fat. The bread, probably rye, you hope rye, with the fat soaking in at the bottom. The salt. You think about the salt. The salt at the Hamburg docks was the right amount of salt, and the right amount of salt is one of those things that sounds simple and is not simple, that requires someone to have made the calculation correctly, and you hope that Schreiber makes it correctly. You believe that he does. You have constructed from fragments of Friedrich's letters and your own need a Schreiber who makes things correctly. He does. On the first night in the room above the shop on Avenue B, Schreiber makes it correctly. You think about the minced beef and the bread. 8 weeks is a long time to be a collection of memories aboard a ship. You arrive in New York Harbor on a morning in January 1849, and the first thing you see is masts. So many masts that the harbor looks like a forest planted in water, the rigging crisscrossing against a winter sky, hundreds of ships anchored or moving or docked along a waterfront that extends further in both directions than you can see from the deck. Behind the forest of masts is the city. Buildings taller than anything in Württemberg, taller than anything in Hamburg, and Hamburg is not a small city. The buildings are pressed together in the cold morning light, each one casting a shadow onto the next, and the whole thing produces an impression of density that is different from the density of European cities because it is younger, louder in a visual sense, less settled. The smell is the other thing. New York Harbor in January smells of coal smoke and cold salt water, and something organic underneath both of those things, something alive and slightly rotten. The smell of a city that is growing faster than it can clean up after itself, which is exactly what New York is doing in 1849. They take you to Castle Garden at the tip of Manhattan, the immigration processing station, a round stone building that was a concert hall until it became a processing centre, and in which a man looks at your papers and another man looks at your tongue, and a third man asks through an interpreter whether you are a criminal, whether you are insane, whether you have any money and who is expecting you. You say no, less than I started with, and you give the name and address of a butcher named Schreiber on Avenue B in the neighbourhood they call Kleindeutschland. They let you through. You step into America. Kleindeutschland, Little Germany. By the time you arrive, there are already 30,000 Germans packed into roughly 20 blocks on the Lower East Side of Manhattan, below 14th Street, east of the Bowery, a city within the city where you can buy Württemberg sausage from a street cart and hear your own dialect spoken at the corner of 10th Street and Avenue B, and find a room in a house run by someone who will not try to steal your remaining coins in the night. By 1855 there will be 100,000 Germans in this neighbourhood, a density that is already remarkable and will continue to increase. By 1880, the wealthier ones will have moved to Brooklyn or uptown, or across the river to New Jersey, making space for the next wave. But in 1849, it is dense and loud and smells specifically of cabbage and dark bread baking, in the early hours, and beer from the basement taverns, and underneath everything the East River, which is what New York uses instead of a sewer system. Schreiber is the butcher your brother-in-law Friedrich mentioned. He came here in 1842 and has built a business on Avenue B selling meat to the German community. And he is the particular kind of immigrant who has succeeded precisely enough to feel generous toward the ones who just arrived, because their presence confirms the rightness of his own decision. and because a generous man costs him very little. He's broad through the shoulders and has a face that has been doing its own thing for 50-some years without much consultation. He greets you at the door of the shop with a handshake that involves most of your hand and some of your wrist. He gives you a room above the shop. There are 2 other men in it, which you discover when you open the door. One of them nods at you. The other is asleep and does not stir. The room has a window that looks into the air shaft between buildings, and a floor, and a door with a lock, and a shared stove in the hallway. And this is, you will realize over the following weeks, considerably better than what many people in Kleindeutschland have. On the first evening, Schreiber feeds you. He does it in the back of the shop, at a workbench cleared of the morning's business, with a directness that suggests feeding is something he considers practical rather than sentimental. Bread, pickled cabbage, and meat. Ground beef, cooked in the pan with thinly cut onions until the outside of the patties is dark brown and the fat has pooled at the edges of the cast iron, and the onions have gone soft and sweet in the beef fat, and the whole kitchen smells of exactly what it is. Protein and fat and allium cooking over heat, which is one of the oldest possible smells in human experience. You eat it standing, because there are not enough chairs, which does not bother you after 8 weeks on the Johanna. The taste is the same as the Hamburg docks, same as what you dreamed about for 8 weeks on the North Sea and the North Atlantic. The same combination of fat and salt and the particular texture of ground beef that has been pressed flat and cooked quickly. So the outside is one thing, and the inside is another, the outside having been transformed by the heat into something firm and slightly crisp, and the inside still yielding when you press it with your tongue. You eat, you do not speak. Schreiber watches you with the expression of a man presenting a case. They eat this in Germany, he says in German. They eat this here too, Germans mostly. But the Americans are beginning to notice. In the autumn of 1849, in the room above Schreiber's shop, you learn how to sleep in America. This sounds simple. It is not simple. Sleep in Kleindeutschland is an exercise in the management of noise and proximity. The building's timbers are thin and old and conduct sound the way old buildings conduct sound, which is everything, all the time. The footsteps above and the arguments to the left and the baby 2 buildings over who has an opinion about the night that it expresses loudly and without scheduling. The street below is Avenue B, and Avenue B at 2 in the morning is a different street than Avenue B at 2 in the afternoon. But it is not a quiet street. It is a street that has decided to continue, in a reduced key, to be itself. You learn to sleep through it. Not immediately. Over weeks. The brain adapts to the ambient level, the way brains adapt under sustained conditions, by reclassifying the noise from urgent to expected, from signal to background. By December, you are sleeping through the baby. What wakes you, sometimes, is not the noise. It is the smell of Schreiber's kitchen on a morning when he is making something that requires the beef and the onion and the iron pan. The smell comes up through the floor of the room, the way the sounds of the Johanna came up through the hull boards, filtered and changed by the transit but still recognizable. Still the specific smell that your body has decided is the smell of, you made it. You made it across the ocean. You are in America. This is what food smells like here. He is right. The Americans are beginning to notice. But the noticing will take time, and the spread will require several additional steps, and one specific hot August day at a county fair will prove to be decisive. First, though, you have to survive in Kleindeutschland, which is its own education. The food culture of Kleindeutschland in the 1850s is dense and specific. The street vendors sell Würste from carts with small charcoal braziers, the sausage smell rising with the steam in the morning cold. The basement taverns serve dark beer and bread, and the particular fermented pickled things that German cooking relies on, because they preserve well and cost almost nothing to produce and go with everything. The butcher shops, Schreber's, and the 5 others within 4 blocks sell the cuts that the German community knows how to use. The cheaper cuts mostly because the community is not wealthy, but treated with the specific German kitchen knowledge that turns cheap cuts into something else entirely. And in the lunch counters that begin to appear along the commercial streets of the neighbourhood, served to the men who work the docks and the factories and the building sites all around the Lower East Side, the minced beef patty appears on the menu at 10 cents. 10 cents in the early 1850s is real money, not extravagant money. The kind of money that a working man can spend without feeling reckless, provided things are going reasonably well. What he gets for 10 cents is the Hamburg preparation. The patty, the fried onions, the bread, the fat, sometimes served on a plate, sometimes between the 2 slices, sometimes, increasingly as the decade goes on, handed across a counter wrapped in paper so the man can take it with him. The takeaway element is crucial. The lunch counter serves a population that does not have time for a sit-down meal. The men who come in at noon have been working since 6 and will work until 6 and have 30 minutes, maybe 40 before the foreman expects them back. A meal that requires a table and a fork costs them time they don't have. A meal they can carry and eat while walking back to the site, that is something else. That is something a city can use. The Hamburg steak is learning what it wants to be. In the 1860s, the menu begins to appear in restaurants that are not specifically German, not yet as a dish that is recognized as German by the Americans who eat it, more as just, this thing you can get at certain lunch counters, cheap, fast, filling, made from minced beef, name varies by establishment, Hamburg steak at some, beefsteak without the steak at others, ground beef patty at the more literal-minded. By the 1870s, the first documented menu appearance of the phrase Hamburg steak in American print, not in a fine restaurant, in the kind of place that serves working men who need a meal in the time it takes to smoke a cigarette. The price is 12 cents, served with bread and boiled potatoes when available. By 1880, the immigrants have spread, not just in New York, in Chicago, where the German quarter is already substantial, in Milwaukee, which will become so heavily German that its beer industry will define it for a century, in Cincinnati, St. Louis, Cleveland, Baltimore, and in the smaller cities and the towns along the rail lines that are being built across the country with a speed that matches the energy of the era, the energy of a country that has decided it is building something and is right about that, even if the details of what it's building are not always admirable. And in all those places wherever Germans cook, there is the minced beef patty in its various forms. It is not a named dish yet, not something with a clear identity. It is still the practical answer to a practical problem, but it is spreading, and it is getting ready to meet a very specific August afternoon in Wisconsin, which is where it will stop being just something Germans eat and start being something else entirely. August 4th, 1885, Outagamie County, Wisconsin. The Seymour County Fair opens at 9 in the morning, but the fairground has been active since before dawn. The vendors arriving in wagons, the livestock being unloaded into temporary pens in the north field, the smell of animals and fresh sawdust and damp grass mixing in the August morning air. By 10 o'clock, when the crowd really begins to arrive, the temperature is already climbing toward the low 80s, which is not brutally hot but is hot enough, combined with the humidity that Wisconsin stores all summer, to make you aware of your body at every moment, the small of your back damp under your shirt, the air you breathe slightly thicker than you want it. The fairground is a meadow at the edge of Seymour. For 3 days a year, it becomes a city of tents and stalls and the particular organised chaos of rural commerce and rural competition, because county fairs are fundamentally about competition. Whose cattle are the finest, whose quilts are the most complex, whose pumpkins have achieved the greatest mass, whose pies have the most perfect crust. You are 15 years old. Your name is Edna, and you have come here with your mother and your 2 brothers because your father is working today, but your mother wanted to see what the Dobbins family is presenting this year, which is as much a social observation as a culinary one, the Dobbins family being known in Outagamie County for a pie crust that is a subject of some discussion. The brass band near the entrance is playing a waltz that keeps losing its footing and wandering into something ambiguous. Not quite a waltz anymore, not quite anything else. The particular music of a brass band that has been playing since 8, and whose members are already thinking about noon. The food stalls are arranged along the western edge of the fairground, in a row of canvas-covered tents and open-fronted wagons. You can smell them from the middle of the fairground. Fried things and sugar and the particular sweet savoury smell of cooked meat that reaches you through the crowd as a warmth above the already warm air. One of the stalls belongs to a 17-year-old boy named Charlie Nagreen. He's driven 14 miles from his family's farm outside Hortonville, and he's arrived at the fair with a pan, a brazier, ground beef, and a plan to sell meatballs. Fried meatballs. Minced beef formed into balls, the way you form minced meat into balls because that is the shape minced meat makes naturally when you press it in your palms. Cooked fast in a hot pan in their own fat. Charlie has a problem, though he hasn't named it yet. The problem is visible if you watch the foot traffic past his stall for an hour, which he has done, and which reveals the following. People stop to buy the meatballs and then they stand there. They have to stand there. The meatball requires both hands or a fork or at minimum a stopped body because it is round and slippery and demands your full attention. And the people at a county fair in Outagamie County in August 1885 do not want to stop. They have things to see, brothers to chase, pumpkins to assess. The fair is motion. The fair is the one day a year when the entire county is in one place, and there are people you haven't seen since last year, and things are happening everywhere, and you need to keep moving. The meatball is the wrong shape for this context. Charlie looks at his pan. He looks at the loaves of bread his mother packed in the wagon. He picks up a meatball and presses it between his palms, flattening it. Not a ball anymore, a disc, a patty. He puts it between 2 pieces of bread. He hands it to the next person who stops. The person takes it and walks away, eating as they go. They come back. They bring someone with them. By noon, the story of Charlie Nagreen's stall has travelled up and down the vendor row by the mechanism that county fair information always travels, which is everyone talking to everyone else. By early afternoon, he has sold more than he expected to sell in the whole 3 days. By the time the fair closes and he drives his empty wagon back toward Hortonville, he has an insight so simple it will define the next 65 years of his life. The food that fits the motion of the people eating it is the food that sells. He will spend the rest of his life making hamburgers at county fairs across Wisconsin. He'll become known as Hamburger Charlie. His death certificate in 1951, when he is 83 years old, will list his occupation simply as hamburger maker. No other occupation is mentioned. No other occupation is needed. The line at Charlie Negrine's stall at the Outagami County Fair on August 4th, 1885 is not instantaneous. It builds. One person takes the pressed flap between bread result and walks away eating it. They come back in 20 minutes with someone else. That person orders one and walks away eating it, and 20 minutes later they have brought someone else. The word of mouth at a county fair travels in this specific pattern, faster than any announcement, slower than any rumour, through the mechanism of the visible thing. Someone eating while walking, someone who looks satisfied, someone who when asked what that is says, "It's at the stall down the row, you should try it." By noon, Charlie Negrine has run out of his first batch of ground beef and is working on his second. By early afternoon, the problem has reversed itself. Where in the morning he had too much meatball and not enough customers, he now has too many customers and not enough beef. He sends his cousin to a farm wagon at the edge of the fairground where a farmer from the area has brought beef for various purposes and buys the rest of what the farmer has, more than he planned on needing, at a price somewhat above what he would have liked because the farmer can see the size of the line at Charlie's stall and has drawn the obvious conclusion about negotiating leverage. Charlie sells everything by 3 in the afternoon. He is out of beef. He is 17 years old and he is sold out of beef at a county fair by 3 in the afternoon. He sits behind his stall on the tailgate of his wagon and he thinks. Not about the money, though the money is better than expected. He's thinking about the shape. He presses his palms together in front of him, the way he pressed the meatball flat this morning. The specific motion, the heel of one hand against the other, the slight rotation that distributed the pressure evenly. He does it again without anything between his palms. He does it again. The meatball was wrong. Not bad. Wrong. It was the wrong shape for what it was supposed to do, which was to be eaten by people who were at a county fair in August and had things to look at and people to find and competitions to observe. People who were not going to stand still in front of a stall and eat something with both hands. He pressed it flat and it became a different thing. Same ingredients, same seasoning, same pan, same heat, same fat, but a different thing. You will carry this through 63 more years of county fairs and roadside stands across Wisconsin and the northern Midwest. And the lesson you carry is not, "I invented the hamburger," though people will say you did. The lesson is, the shape of the food is part of the food. The shape is not incidental to what the food is. The shape is what determines whether you can eat this while walking or only while standing still, and whether you can eat while walking determines whether you eat at all in certain circumstances, and whether you eat at all in certain circumstances determines whether you sell anything, which determines whether there is a stall at all. The shape of the food is the business. Nobody has stated this so clearly before, or if they have, it has not reached Wisconsin. Charlie Negrine drives the wagon back toward Hortonville in the long August evening. The county fair sounds fade behind him, the brass band gone home, the livestock return to their trailers, the fairground returning to meadow. The road is dusty in the August dry. The horse knows the way. He's thinking about next year. But here is the complicated truth, and it is the kind of complication that makes historians a bit tense. In that same year, 1885, 2 brothers named Frank and Charles Menches are running a food stall at a fair in Hamburg, New York. Hamburg, New York is a real town in Erie County, named after the German city for reasons that made sense to the people who named it in the early 19th century. The Menches brothers run out of their usual sausage filling and substitute ground beef and put it between bread, and because they are literally in a town called Hamburg, they call the result a hamburger. Whether the Menches brothers knew Charlie Negreen, whether Charlie Negreen knew about them, whether either of them had heard about the German-American lunch counters in New York City and Milwaukee and Cincinnati, where minced beef has been served on bread for 30 years. None of this is documented. The simultaneous independent discovery of the obvious by multiple people who did not know each other is one of the most common events in history, because ideas that are ready to exist will exist, and the hamburger was ready to exist. There is a third story. Louis Lassen, at a lunch counter he called Lewis's Lunch in New Haven, Connecticut, claims the year 1900. He serves his hamburger between two pieces of toasted white bread, vertically broiled, with a slice of cheese and a slice of tomato. No ketchup, no mustard, no exceptions. Lewis's Lunch still exists. It still serves the hamburger this way. There is a sign about the no ketchup rule. You do not argue with the sign. And there is a fourth story, which may be the most consequential in terms of what actually spread the word across the country. A man named Fletcher Davis, who everyone called Old Dave, ran a lunch counter in Athens, Texas, and had been serving ground beef sandwiches since somewhere in the 1880s. In 1904, he set up a stall at the Louisiana Purchase Exposition in St. Louis, Missouri, also known as the St. Louis World's Fair, and served his sandwich to the crowds. A reporter from New York named Carey was there. He tasted it. He went home and wrote about it. The article ran in New York papers and then in papers across the country, because the World's Fair was a national story, and anything connected to it got national pickup. The St. Louis World's Fair of 1904 is where American food makes its decisions. The same fair gave the country the ice cream cone, when an ice cream vendor ran out of dishes and a nearby waffle vendor started rolling his waffles into cones to hold the ice cream. The same fair introduced Dr. Pepper to a national audience. The fair introduced the corn dog and iced tea and cotton candy as nationally known American foods, because a fair that draws 20 million visitors in a single season is the best distribution system anyone has yet invented for a food that wants to spread. But what the fair did for the hamburger was give it a name that the whole country knew. Before 1904 it was regional. Local knowledge, concentrated in German-American communities and certain lunch counters in cities that had a lot of German immigrants. After 1904, it was American. The word hamburger is in national circulation by 1905. By 1910, you can order one in diners across the country and be understood. By 1920, it is unremarkable. By 1930, it is the country's most popular sandwich. Between the county fair epiphany and the white walls of the first White Castle in Wichita 26 years pass. They are not uneventful years in the hamburger's history or in the country's. Theodore Roosevelt takes office. The Pure Food and Drug Act passes. The Model T arrives. The Great War comes and goes, taking 17 million people and reshaping the geography of the countries that had been sending immigrants to America. The railroad network reaches its maximum extent and begins to be supplemented by roads, by the automobile that is filling those roads with an acceleration that no one in 1885 fully predicted. The hamburger spreads through all of this, quietly, without announcement, in the way that useful food spread, by being served in more places and ordered by more people, and appearing on more menus and costing a little less each decade as the beef industry scales to the demand. In Chicago, in 1910, the hamburger appears on the menu of a lunch wagon parked outside a factory gate. serving the workers who have 20 minutes for a meal and 9 cents to spend on it. In Baltimore in the same year, it is on the menu of a diner near the Harbor District. In St. Louis, the World's Fair effect has not faded. Hamburgers are on the menus of places that would not have served them in 1903. Each new cook brings their own interpretation. The amount of fat in the mix, the ratio of onion to beef, whether salt goes in before or after cooking, the temperature of the grill. None of these variations is specified by anyone because no one has specified anything. The hamburger in 1910 is still a category description rather than a recipe, and a category description is, in food as in language, a thing that eventually requires standardization. You cannot grow indefinitely as a category description. At some point the category needs to mean something specific. Billy Ingram understood this. But between the county fair epiphany and the national diner menu, something has to happen. The hamburger, as Charlie Nagreen and the Menches brothers and Louis Lassen and old Dave Davis understood it, is still a variable thing. It is still whatever the cook in front of you decides to make. The beef might be good or it might be something else. The bread might be fresh or it might be from last week. The temperature of the grill, the cooking time, the amount of fat in the mix, the degree to which the cook has been awake since 5 this morning and is operating on his 3rd coffee, and his 2nd hour of standing in a 100-degree tent. All of this varies. The food culture of Kleindeutschland does something specific to the Hamburg preparation that you don't notice happening. In Germany, the minced beef at the Hamburg docks was a dock food, a working man's convenience, with no pretension and no name and no particular status. It was the cheapest satisfying thing a cook could make quickly, and it occupied that exact position in the hierarchy of food, below what the merchants ate, above what the truly destitute ate, exactly calibrated to the space available at the lower end of the labour market. In Kleindeutschland, it retains this character, but gains something it didn't have before. It becomes an identifier. To eat the Hamburg steak in a lunch counter on Avenue B in 1855 is to eat German, not elegantly German, not ceremonially German, not the Germany of fine dining or festival cooking, the everyday German. The food that the mother in the old country made on Thursdays when the budget was tight and the week was long. It carries the particular weight that immigrant food always carries, which is the weight of the place you came from, compressed into flavour. This weight is not always comfortable. The second generation, the children of Karl and Schreiber and all the others who came through Hamburg in the 1840s, will sometimes be embarrassed by this food, embarrassed by its cheapness and its association with the immigrant life they are trying to move beyond. They will discover that the broader American culture does not share their embarrassment, that what they consider working-class German food looks, from outside, like an interesting and flavourful preparation from a different country, which is the particular alchemy of immigration. What is ordinary from the inside is exotic from the outside, until it isn't, until it has crossed over, and then it is just American. The crossing over takes approximately 30 years. By 1885, the Hamburg steak at a lunch counter in New York is eaten by people who know nothing about Hamburg, who have never been near a German neighbourhood, who simply know that a minced beef patty between bread is a thing they can get at the counter, and it is filling and fast. The crossing has happened, but it happens without a moment, without a ceremony. The way these things always happen, one counter at a time, one cook who is not German deciding to try the preparation because the German cook at the next counter is doing good business with it. One customer from outside the community who tries it, and orders it again and mentions it to someone. And then, one afternoon in August, there is Charlie Negreen and his meatballs and a flat and the shape that fixes everything. The Louisiana Purchase Exposition opens in St. Louis on April 30th, 1904, and it will run until December 1st, and in those 7 months approximately 20 million people will pass through its gates, which is a number that represents more than a quarter of the entire population of the United States at that time. They come from everywhere. They come by train, mostly because the railroad has made St. Louis the crossroads of the continent, and the fairground at the edge of Forest Park is the terminus of several of those lines, temporary stations built to manage the volume. You have come from Ohio. Your name is Mabel Harding. You are 31 years old, and you have come with your husband James and your daughter Ruth, who is 9, and your sister-in-law Clara, who has never been to a World's Fair, and whose expression since the train pulled into St. Louis has been the expression of someone whose prior mental image of something large has been replaced by the actual scale of the thing, which is larger in the specific way that the World's Fair is always larger than anyone's mental image. The fair occupies 1,100 acres. This is a number that means nothing until you are inside it, and you have been walking for 3 hours, and you have seen perhaps a fifth of what there is to see, and your feet have understood the 1,100 acres in a way that the number itself could not convey. The Pike is the midway, the entertainment strip that runs through the south section of the grounds, and it is where the food concentrates. You smell it before you see it, the way you've been smelling things before you see them all day, because the fair produces a rolling landscape of smell that changes every 20 feet. Roasted corn, caramel, something fried in hot oil, the sweet ammonia of a livestock barn 200 yards to the north, the specific perfume of 10,000 people perspiring in August. The Pike smell is the cooking smell, the fat and heat smell, and you can read different preparations in it if you slow down and pay attention. One stall's beef going dark on a flat iron, another's chicken on a wood spit, another's the sharp, sweet smell of something sugared and fried. Ruth has found the beef stall before you realise she has moved. She's standing in front of a man who's working a flat iron griddle on a small wood fire. He is tall, with the particular tan of someone who has spent most of his life outdoors, and he has the comfortable efficiency of a person who has done the same task 10,000 times and has stopped thinking about the individual steps. His name is Fletcher Davis, though everyone in Athens, Texas has always called him Old Dave, and he's been here since the fair opened in April, and he has been serving approximately 500 of these sandwiches every day, except rain, days when the number drops to perhaps 300, and the days when something spectacular is happening at the main pavilion, and the number drops further because people forget to be hungry when something spectacular is happening. He presses the beef flat on the griddle with a spatula, leaning into the press so the patty makes full contact with the iron, and the fat comes out of it fast and pools at the edges. The sizzle changes pitch when he does this, rising slightly as the surface area in contact with the heat increases. You can hear the pitch change from where you're standing, 5 feet behind Ruth, and the sound is the sound of something being correctly made. There is a rightness to it. The sound of a process going the way it is supposed to go. The bun is American white bread, soft and light, nothing like the dark rye of Hamburg or the dense bread of the old country. Everything that immigration and the American grain surplus have made it. Accessible, yielding, comfortable. He opens the bun with one hand and puts the cooked patty in it with the spatula. One motion, practiced to the point of unconscious. and the fat from the beef immediately begins migrating into the bread at the contact surface. Ruth has her hand out. Old Dave charges 5 cents and he takes it from her palm. She's been carrying her own money all day, the particular freedom of a 9-year-old trusted with money at a World's Fair, and he gives her the sandwich wrapped in a square of paper. You pay your own 5 cents, you get your own. You eat it standing on the pike while a band further down plays something that might be a march if it committed more firmly to the tempo. The bun is soft and the beef is salty, and the fat has made the bottom of the bun exactly as yielding as it should be, and the whole thing has the temperature of something made 2 minutes ago, which it was, and the temperature of something made 2 minutes ago is the temperature that your body receives as someone made this for you right now. It is not left over. It is not from yesterday. It was made for this moment. A reporter from New York is at the fair on an assignment about the fair. His name, in most of the accounts, is Carey. He is from the Tribune. He finds old Dave's stall the way Ruth found it, which is, he follows his nose and then he follows the line. He writes about it. The article runs in New York in October and gets picked up by papers across the country, because the wire services exist precisely to carry St. Louis World's Fair stories from the fair to everywhere else. And the Hamburger story has the virtue of being a story about a taste that anyone can acquire, which makes it the kind of story that people read and then try to replicate. By December of 1904, every diner operator in America who reads a newspaper knows the word Hamburger. By 1905, most of them are serving one. What they serve is variable. The word is national, but the preparation is local, made by whoever happens to be behind whatever counter you're standing at, made from whatever ground beef they happen to buy, cooked on whatever surface they have, at whatever temperature they guess is approximately correct. The Hamburger in 1907 is a different sandwich in Louisville than it is in Philadelphia than it is in San Francisco. The word is the same. The experience is whatever it is. The word is the first step. Standardization is the second. And standardization requires a different kind of mind. It requires the mind that looks at a food that millions of people are eating in 100 different versions and thinks, what if they could trust the version they have not tried yet? What if the version in Omaha and the version in Cincinnati and the version in Kansas City were the same version? What if the reliability were the product? What the Hamburger needs next is not just a national reputation. What it needs is a system. Systems arrive slowly and then all at once. This one arrives in Wichita, Kansas, on September the 13th, 1921, in a building that is very specifically designed to look like a small white castle. You can see it from half a block away, which is the point. The building is maybe 40 feet across and 20 feet deep, built from white enamel-painted concrete, with a facade designed to suggest, as economically as possible, the battlements of a medieval fortification. Small towers at the corners, crenellations along the roof line, everything white. The whiteness is not incidental. The whiteness is a mission statement. White is what this building is about. The smell reaches you before the building is in full view, not the complex layered smell of a full restaurant kitchen. Simpler than that. Cleaner. Beef cooking on steel, onions sweating in beef fat, bread warming in a closed container beside the grill. 3 elements. Those 3, and underneath them something sharp and astringent that turns out to be the bleach solution that the cook, visible behind the counter, white uniform, white paper hat, uses to wipe down every surface between every batch of patties. The bleach is the crucial detail. The bleach is why this works. The year is 1921. The context is important. Upton Sinclair published The Jungle in 1906, a novel about the Chicago meatpacking industry, whose descriptions of slaughterhouse conditions were so specific and so nauseating that the book caused a national crisis about what exactly was in commercial ground meat. Theodore Roosevelt read it and pushed through the Pure Food and Drug Act and the Meat Inspection Act almost immediately. But reading is not forgetting, and a significant percentage of the American public carries, 15 years later, a background anxiety about ground beef that they may not be able to articulate, but which influences their behaviour at the counter of a lunch wagon. Billy Ingram is a real estate man in Wichita who has become partners with a cook named Walter Anderson, and together they understand this anxiety with a clarity that most people in the food business in 1921 don't quite have. They understand that the problem with selling hamburgers to the American public is not the hamburger. The hamburger is fine. The problem is the American public's entirely reasonable uncertainty about what goes into the hamburger and in what conditions. Their solution is the castle. They make everything visible. The cook is visible behind the counter. His hands are visible. The grill is visible. The process from raw beef to finished sandwich happens in full view of every customer, because a process you can see is a process you can assess, and a process you can assess is a process you can trust. There is no back room. There is no closed door. Nothing is happening that you cannot see. The white surfaces make every imperfection immediately apparent, which means that every surface that is white and unimpaired is evidence of recent cleaning. The bleach smell, which becomes associated with White Castle so strongly that employees will later describe it as the restaurant's defining sensory signature, is the smell of a place that takes the anxiety seriously. And then there is the hamburger itself. The cook in the white uniform is working with a precision that you watch for a full 2 minutes before you sit down because the rhythm of it is almost hypnotic. He takes a ball of raw ground beef, presses it onto the grill with the heel of his hand. The press is not casual. It has a specific result. A patty that is exactly 1.3 ounces, exactly the right diameter to fit the bun, exactly the right thickness to cook through in the time allotted. Before the patty goes on, he has put onions directly on the grill surface, thin sliced white onions that begin to sweat in the beef fat that is already on the steel from the previous batch. The patty goes on top of a bed of softening onion. Then he pokes 5 holes in the patty with his fingers. The holes allow steam to escape from the meat as it cooks, which means more even cooking throughout the patty and less steaming of the top surface, which means the top surface browns rather than steams, which means more of the Maillard reaction, which is the chain of chemical events that happen when proteins and sugars are exposed to high heat, and that produce the compounds that a human nose reads as cooked, good, satisfying. Nobody in this kitchen knows the word Maillard, but the result is in the flavour, which is richer from the holes than it would be without them, and the cook knows this from experience if not from biochemistry. The bun goes on top of the patty, dome down, sitting on top of the sizzling beef. The steam that rises from the cooking meat goes into the bun and warms it, and softens the crumb and begins to transfer the smell of cooking beef into the bread before the bread has touched the beef directly. This is the steam system, and it produces a bun that is warmed through and permeated with the smell of what it is about to contain, which means when you finally bite into it, the flavour begins before the beef flavour arrives. In 90 seconds, the cook removes the bun, places the patty in it with a practiced scoop of the spatula, adds nothing else, wraps it in a small square of waxed paper, and hands it across the counter. 5 cents. You eat it in 2 bites. It is designed to be eaten in 2 bites. The smallness of it is not a limitation. The smallness is a design choice, because small means you can eat several of them in succession, which means you can order as many as your hunger requires rather than committing to a single large hamburger that may or may not be what you needed. You can eat 4 and feel full, or you can eat 2 and feel like a light lunch, or you can eat 1 and decide what happens next. The small hamburger is a food that adjusts to you rather than requiring you to adjust to it. By 1930, there are over 100 White Castle restaurants in cities across the Midwest and Northeast. Billy Ingram has figured out the franchise system before anyone is calling it a franchise. The same recipe, the same equipment, the same building design, the same uniforms, the same cleaning protocols, the same price. What you get in Omaha is what you get in Cincinnati, is what you get in Kansas City. The reliability is the product. You're not selling a hamburger, you're selling certainty. By 1934, they have sold 100 million hamburgers. In 1921, when the first White Castle opened, 100 million hamburgers was an impossible number. By 1934, it is a milestone they celebrated by printing it in their company newsletter and then going back to work. The system is working. The system is, in fact, the point. But there is something that White Castle doesn't have. Something that won't exist for another 25 years. Something that requires California and a parking lot and 2 brothers from New Hampshire who are constitutionally incapable of accepting inefficiency. On a Tuesday in October 1927 in a White Castle on a commercial street in Columbus, Ohio, the lunch rush begins at 11:45 and does not end until 1:15. And in those 90 minutes, the cook named Herbert produces exactly 432 hamburgers. He knows this because he counts, not by making marks on a tally, by keeping a running count in the part of his brain that does not require conscious attention. The way experienced cooks develop the ability to track multiple things simultaneously. The way experienced grill cooks always know roughly how many patties have been cooked, because the body keeps count when the mind is occupied with other things. 432 hamburgers in 90 minutes means 1 every 12.5 seconds, averaged across the rush, which is not actually how it works. It works in bursts, 6 patties down, 2 minutes, scoop and wrap, 6 more down. But the average is the number that Herbert finds satisfying when he adds it up at 1:15, when the rush breaks, and the counter quiets, and he gets a minute to wipe down the grill and assess what the afternoon will require. 14 dozen and change. That's a lot of cows, distributed across the servings, though the portions are small enough that the math is manageable, and the math has to be manageable because the economics of a White Castle hamburger at 5 cents require the beef cost to be a fraction of the nickels coming in. The customers during the lunch rush are the people Herbert expects, and a few he doesn't. The factory workers from the plant 2 blocks over who come in groups of 3 and 4, who order in multiples of 4 because 1 each plus 1 spare is the lunch routine. The office workers from the insurance company across the street who come in 1s and 2s, who sometimes order just 2 and sometimes order 4, whose order depends on what they had last night and how the morning went. The delivery driver whose truck is double parked outside for the exact 7 minutes it takes him to get to the counter, order, receive, eat standing at the counter because there is no time to sit and get back to the truck. And occasionally, someone new. Today at 12:20, a woman he has not seen before comes in through the door with a specific expression of someone who's heard about a place but has not been. She stops just inside the door. She looks at the counter. She looks at Herbert. She looks at the grill, which is visible, which is the point. She watches for a moment. She watches Herbert take a ball of ground beef and press it onto the onion bed and put 5 holes in it with his fingers. She orders one. She eats it at the counter. She orders another. She's eating the second one when a woman about her age comes in. A friend she must have called from somewhere. And the first woman says, before the second woman has reached the counter, "You have to try this. This is how it spreads. Not through advertising, though White Castle does advertise. Not through the newspaper, though the newspaper food pages mention it. Through one person at a counter saying to another person, 'You have to try this.'" The second woman orders one. She eats it. She considers. She orders 2 more. Herbert notes this without comment. He presses 3 more patties onto the onion bed. The grill continues. The thing it doesn't have is everyone. White Castle is serving urban populations, working-class neighbourhoods, the lunch crowds of Midwestern cities. It has not yet figured out how to serve everyone everywhere all the time. The infrastructure doesn't exist yet. The highway doesn't exist yet. The suburb, in its full post-war American form, doesn't exist yet. What has to happen first is the Second World War, which produces, among other things, a generation of American men and women who've been fed by industrial systems at scale, and who return home expecting efficiency, expecting uniformity, expecting the world to function with the same organizational precision that the military supply chain delivered. These people are going to build the suburbs and buy the cars and drive on the highways and need somewhere to eat. And when they eat, they're going to want what they know, which is fast, consistent, and cheap. Everything that happens in San Bernardino in 1948 is a response to this expectation. Everything the McDonald brothers are about to do is already waiting to be done. They are just the first people to do it right. San Bernardino, California, 1398 North E Street. Tuesday, the 3rd week of May, 1948. The morning's already warm with the particular California warmth that builds from the valley floors and saturates the air before the coastal cool can reach this far inland. The mountains to the north are still snow-capped at the highest elevations. The orange groves that define this part of the inland empire are in full leaf, and some are still carrying late-season fruit, and the smell of orange blossom from the previous month is gone, but the memory of it persists in the way smells persist in an agricultural landscape. The building at 1398 North E Street is an octagon. 8 sides, which is unusual for a restaurant building, but which makes practical sense because it means there is no bad angle from the parking lot. Every spot has a view of the kitchen. Every customer can see from their car window the full operation. The car hops in their uniforms, the serving hatches, the interior illuminated in the California evening. The car hops are the attraction. Girls on roller skates who bring your food to the car window on a tray that hooks over the door. The whole drive-in experience is theatre as much as dining. The order, the wait, the wheels approaching across the asphalt, the tray arriving. People come for the theatre, teenagers especially. The parking lot fills up on summer evenings with cars full of people who are as interested in being seen as in being fed. Richard and Maurice McDonald have run this operation for 8 years. They are brothers from New Hampshire, transplanted to California in 1930, and they are precise, systematic men who've been watching their business with increasing unease. They are doing well. The business is profitable. The customers come. But what they see when they look at their kitchen is waste, inefficiency. A 25-item menu that requires 20 or more people to produce, half of them on roller skates, all of them dependent on tips, which means their income varies, which means their reliability varies, which means some nights the service is excellent, and some nights it is not. They see a cooking operation that is reactive rather than designed. Things happen in the kitchen because of where the equipment was put when they first opened, and where the equipment was put was based on what was available at the time, not on what would produce the fastest or most consistent result. The grill is here because there was a gas line near here. The prep station is there because that was where there was space. The whole kitchen is an accretion of decisions made under various forms of constraint, and it shows. What they want is to build the kitchen backwards, not what equipment do we have, where does it fit, but what is the ideal sequence of operations, and what does that sequence require, and where should each element be to serve the sequence. In December 1948 they close. They fire the car hops. They gut the kitchen. Then they go into the parking lot. In the parking lot they use streamers of paper taped to the asphalt to mark out the proposed kitchen layout. They walk through the operations in real time, empty-handed, miming the movements. Here is where the patties will be pressed. Here is where the grill is. Here is where the buns are toasted. Here is where the condiments are placed. Here is where the finished sandwich is wrapped. They time themselves. They note where the paths cross, where the movements conflict, where one person's task requires them to pass through the space of another person's task, creating the kind of small collisions and delays that add up over a service into minutes, and over thousands of services into something you can actually see in the bottom line. They rearrange the streamers, they walk through it again, they time themselves again. They do this for days, weeks. The parking lot in December is cold by California standards, cold enough that they work in their coats, and the neighbours on North E Street probably think something strange is happening. Two men in their 40s walking in circles in an empty parking lot, but the McDonald brothers are not thinking about what anyone thinks. They're thinking about 45 seconds. 45 seconds is the time between an order arriving at the counter and a wrapped hamburger being placed on that counter. That is the target. That is what the streamers in the parking lot are designed to achieve. The menu that comes out of this process is 9 items: hamburgers, cheeseburgers, milk, coffee, soft drinks, potato chips, pie. That's it. No fried chicken, no fish sandwich, no breakfast menu, no daily specials. 9 items, all of which can be prepared on a grill and a fryer and assembled at a single station, all of which can be produced in sequence without requiring different cooking equipment or significantly different technique. The potato chips will become French fries within the first year, when the brothers discover that fresh-cut potatoes fried in oil hold their heat better than chips, present better in the bag, and give the customer the experience of a substantial side rather than a snack. The fry station will become its own significant piece of the speedy service system, because the fries will eventually become, for many customers, the primary reason for the visit, the hamburger being almost a vehicle for the fry experience, but that is later. What matters in December 1948 is the kitchen. The rebuilt kitchen is 9 feet wide and is organised around a single sequence. Patties, preformed to specification, come from storage to grill, grill to warming tray to assembly station, condiments applied in sequence, bun placed, wrapped, to counter. The path is a straight line, or close to it. Nobody crosses paths. Nobody shares a work surface for different tasks at the same time. Everything that needs to be within arm's reach is within arm's reach. The grill temperature is specified. The cooking time is specified. The patty weight is specified, 2 ounces, no more than 19% fat. These specifications are not suggestions, they are the system. Deviation from the specifications is deviation from the system, and deviation from the system is the thing the McDonald brothers have specifically set out to eliminate. When the rebuilt McDonald's opens in December 1948, the price of a hamburger is 15 cents. The line on the opening day stretches around the building. Now here is what it looks like from inside, because you need to know what it smells like and sounds like, and what the weight of a spatula in a tired hand feels like at hour 6 of an 8-hour grill shift. Because otherwise, all of this is just a story about efficiency, which is not a story that keeps you awake, or in this case, helps you sleep. The approach to the first White Castle on East William Street in Wichita on the morning of September the 14th, 1921, the day after it opens, smells of bleach from half a block away. Not the hamburger smell, not yet. The bleach first. It is the smell of a decision. Billy Ingram has thought carefully about the smell of bleach and what it communicates to a person approaching the building, and his conclusion is that the smell of bleach communicates exactly what he needs it to communicate. This place is clean. This place takes cleaning seriously. This place has considered the question of hygiene and has answered it in advance, before you even stepped inside, with a smell that your nose knows, that your body associates with hospitals and schools and institutions, where cleanliness is not optional because the cost of failure is too high. The fear that the bleach smell is addressing is real and specific. It has been real and specific since 1906, when Upton Sinclair published The Jungle, his novel about the Chicago meatpacking industry, a book that was intended as a critique of labor conditions, but whose most powerful effect, the one that readers could not put down and could not stop thinking about, was the description of what went into ground beef at a large industrial facility. Not just the poor cuts, which everyone expected, the contamination, the rat droppings, the occasional worker injury that was incorporated into the product rather than stop the line. The novel sold 300,000 copies in its first year. Theodore Roosevelt read it while eating a steak and reportedly threw the steak out the window, which may be apocryphal but captures the response accurately. 18 years later, in 1921, the people who remember reading The Jungle, or who remember hearing their parents talk about reading The Jungle, are still buying ground beef because they have to eat, but they are buying it with a background anxiety that has never fully resolved. The ground beef in the meat case has always been the cut they cannot see being made. The hamburger at lunch counter has always been made in a kitchen behind a door. Billy Ingram opens the door. The cook at the White Castle is visible from the street. You don't have to guess what's happening behind the counter. The counter is the kitchen, or rather, the kitchen has no boundary that separates it from the counter, because the separation was the problem, and Billy Ingram has eliminated the separation. The flat-top grill where the patties cook is visible from every stool at the counter. The tray where the onions are sliced is visible. The walk-in cooler door is visible. The cleaning that happens between every single production cycle, the wipe down with the bleach solution, is visible, performed in front of every customer who is sitting at the counter, which is evidence, not testimony. Evidence. The difference matters. Testimony requires you to believe a person. Evidence requires only that you observe a surface that is white and clean, which you can verify with your own eyes. White Castle is built around a surface that reveals the truth about itself. The white enamel on the counter reveals dirt immediately if it exists. The white tile on the walls reveals grease immediately. The white uniform on the cook reveals a stain immediately. White Castle made cleanliness the most self-evident claim in the restaurant business, by making it the one claim that cannot be faked in front of a watching customer. You sit at the counter. There are 6 stools. The cook, Walter Anderson today, because this is still the original location and the original partners, is 3 feet from you. He's working onions, thin sliced white onion, the rings separated on the cutting board, then raked onto the hot grill surface in a layer over which the patties will go. The onions begin sweating immediately, their moisture coming out in the heat, the sugars at the surface beginning their conversion to the sweeter, softer compounds that cooked onion produces. The smell of onion on a hot flat iron surface is the smell of this process, which is mild and sweet and fundamentally hospitable. The kind of smell that does not argue with your hunger, but confirms it. He takes a portion of raw ground beef. He weighs it on the scale beside the grill. You can see the scale, the needle, the reading, 1.3 ounces every time. He puts it on the onion bed and presses it flat with a spatula. Then, and this is the specific thing about White Castle, that you noticed before you ordered and that you're watching now, he takes his finger, the clean finger, the finger of a person in a white uniform who has washed his hands in this hour in front of customers who are watching, and he presses 5 holes into the raw patty. The holes. You looked at them when your food arrived this morning. The 5 circular depressions in the surface of the cooked patty. They seemed decorative. They are not decorative. The holes allow steam from the cooking patty to escape upward rather than building under the surface and lifting the patty from the grill, which would slow the cooking on the bottom. The holes increase the surface area exposed to the heat, which means more of the protein is undergoing the browning reactions that produce flavour. The holes are engineering. They are the specific engineering of a cook who has thought carefully about what a patty needs in order to cook correctly in the time he has specified it should cook in. 90 seconds. He puts the bun on top of the patty before the patty is done. The bun goes on dome down, sitting on the hot patty and the sweating onion, and the steam from both of them enters the bun from beneath, warming it, beginning to smell of beef, fat and onion before the bun has had any direct contact with the patty. This steaming of the bun is the White Castle innovation that nobody talks about because it is too simple to seem like an innovation. It solves the problem of the cold bun. The bun that comes from the rack at room temperature and goes on the hot patty and cools the patty immediately at the contact surface. The steamed bun arrives at the patty already warm, already moistened, already carrying the smell of the cooking, and the result is a sandwich in which the temperature difference between the bread and the meat is minimal, which is the result that produces the uniform experience of the first bite. He removes the bun. He scoops the patty and the translucent sweetened onion into the bun with a motion that wastes no steps. He wraps it in the square of waxed paper. He slides it across the counter. 5 cents. You eat it. Then you order another. This. The 2 at a time purchase, the sack of 10 on Saturday afternoon. The order that keeps going because 1 is not a meal and 2 is acceptable. And the price makes 3 feel possible. This is the other discovery. The small patty is the right size not because it is all that anyone wants, but because it is the right size to order multiple times. The economics of the small patty in a culture that is learning to eat at counters and in cars and in the 15 minutes between the end of one thing and the beginning of another are the economics of accumulation. 1 patty is a snack. 4 patties are a meal, 8 patties are what you get for Saturday afternoon and 1 o'clock in the morning after the late shift and the moment your body tells you it has been running too long on nothing. White Castle understands this before most people understand that it is a thing to understand. The small patty is not a small offering, it is an invitation to return to the window. By 1930, there are over 100 White Castle locations in cities across the Midwest and Northeast. Billy Ingram has not franchised in the modern sense. He owns every location, maintains every standard, employs every cook, but he has learned that the building itself is part of the product, and that the building must be the same building everywhere. White enamel exterior, crenellations, the towers, the cook visible from the street, the counter at which you can watch the food being made, the smell of bleach arriving before the smell of beef. The reliability is the product. You are not selling a hamburger, you are selling certainty. You are selling the experience of knowing, before you have ordered, before you have paid, before you have taken the first bite, that the hamburger you are about to have will be the same hamburger you had last time. By 1934, 100 million hamburgers. It is a number that requires the entire infrastructure of American industrial agriculture to support. The cattle ranches in the Great Plains, the feedlots in the Midwest, the meat packing plants in Chicago and Kansas City, the distribution chains that carry refrigerated beef from the plants to the restaurants, the bakeries that supply the buns to White Castle's specifications, the suppliers of onions and waxed paper and bleach. All of it existed before White Castle, in service of other purposes. White Castle reorganized it. White Castle pointed it at a standardized patty and a 5-cent price and a specific building on a specific street in Wichita and said, "Begin." What begins in 1921 in Wichita is not just the hamburger chain. It is the logic of the system. The logic that says, if you can specify the output completely, you can reproduce it everywhere. If you can reproduce it everywhere, you can serve everyone. If you can serve everyone, you have built something that the country needed without knowing it. Ray Kroc will refine this logic in 1955. McDonald's will extend it further in 1965. Burger King will argue with it productively beginning in the 1970s. But the logic is Billy Ingram's. The 5 holes in the patty and the bleach smell from half a block away. You are a grill cook. Your name is Terry. It is 1955. The McDonald's on North E Street is 2 years into its operation under the franchise agreement that Ray Kroc signed with the brothers, and it is doing a volume of business that would have seemed impossible to the lunch counter operators of 1920. And somewhat alarming to anyone who doesn't understand why it's happening. You start at 7 in the morning. The kitchen is not large. The grill is 4 feet wide and about 2 feet deep. A flat steel surface heated from below by gas burners to a surface temperature of 375 degrees Fahrenheit. You can feel the heat before you're close to it. When you stand at the grill for 8 hours, you learn not to feel it in a conscious way, the way you learn not to hear constant noise after a while, but your skin registers it at every moment. The backs of your hands above the edge of the wrist are always slightly more pink than the rest of you by the end of a shift. The skin on your forearms is permanently drier than it used to be. The patties arrive in the morning from the processor. They are cold, which is intentional. Cold patties cook more reliably than warm ones because the cold center acts as a temperature reference, gives you a way to estimate doneness by touch without cutting into the meat and letting the heat escape. They come in sleeves of waxed paper, 6 to a sleeve. You peel apart the paper with your fingers, the cold of the meat transferring through the waxed paper to your fingertips, and lay them on the grill 6 at a time in a row, left to right. so you know which ones have been on longest. The sound of cold meat hitting hot steel is specific, not the sharp sizzle you might expect. Something lower pitched, almost a hiss, as the surface water in the meat flash evaporates and the fat begins to render. Then, 10 seconds later, the sizzle proper as the fat hits the steel, and the Maillard reaction begins at the contact surface. The smell comes immediately. This is the thing about cooking beef that never becomes unremarkable, no matter how many hours you spend at this grill. The smell of beef fat rendering and the proteins at the surface undergoing the reactions that produce the hundreds of flavour compounds that a human nose reads as food, good food, food that will do what you need food to do. The smell is not complicated the way a French sauce is complicated. It does not require context or education. It is a smell that every human who has ever eaten cooked meat recognizes without thinking, reaching back to something older than cooking as we understand it, older than restaurants, older than anything except the fire and the meat and the hunger. At 90 seconds, you flip. The motion is not random. You have a technique now, 3 weeks into the job, a rotation of the spatula that lifts the edge of the patty and turns it without distorting the shape. The uncooked side goes down, the cooked side up. The cooked side is brown at the edges and darker in the centre, with a slight crust where the fat has crisped. It smells different now that it's cooked, deeper, with a specific note of caramelized fat that the uncooked side didn't have. You watch the order board while you work. The board shows you the incoming orders as they come from the front counter. B for plain burger, CB for cheeseburger, the condiment codes beside each one. You read the board and you match the patties on the grill to the sequence on the board, and you manage the timing so that the patty that's been on longest comes off first, in the sequence that matches what's been ordered longest. This is not difficult work in the way that calculating something is difficult. It is difficult in the way that any sustained physical precision is difficult, which is that you must maintain the same level of attention at hour 7 that you maintained at hour 1. And the hour 7 attention comes from a body that is tired and a mind that has been doing this since 7 this morning, and which is beginning to have opinions about that. Your feet are the first thing. The kitchen floor is rubber matted, but there is still a specific fatigue that comes from standing on a hard surface for 8 hours, a fatigue that begins in the arches and works up through the calves and settles by late afternoon in the lower back. You shift your weight constantly. You have learned to slightly bend your knees when you're standing still, which distributes the load differently and postpones a back pain by an hour or so. Your hands are the other thing, not painful exactly, but present. The constant grip of the spatula handle, which is hard rubber, and grips well when your hands are dry and less well when the heat has made them damp, which is most of the time. The heat from the grill radiating across the backs of your hands, the occasional splash of fat when a particularly cold patty hits the steel, which you've learned to lean slightly away from, not enough to affect your work, just enough to protect your forearms. 2 feet to your right, Gus is at the assembly station. Gus is 16, with the focused attention of someone who has found a skill and is pleased with himself for having it. He takes the cooked patty from the warming tray, places it on the crown of the bun, applies condiments in the specified sequence, sauce, onions, pickles, mustard, ketchup if ordered. The sequence is specified because the structural integrity of the assembled sandwich depends on it. The sauce going on last, but 2 means it has a moment to anchor the onion before the pickles go on top. The mustard going under the ketchup means the 2 sharp flavours are layered rather than mixed. These are things that the McDonald brothers worked out on paper and then confirmed by making and eating a great many hamburgers. Gus wraps the assembled hamburger in a single folding motion that produces a neat package in under 3 seconds. He does this hundreds of times a day. By the end of a shift, it has become autonomous, the hands doing the task without the mind particularly supervising, which is the point of a designed system. The system becomes the operator's second nature, and the operator can then give their attention to the variations that the system doesn't account for. The unusual order, the difficult customer, the equipment that is running slightly off today, the whole operation from you laying the cold patty on the grill to Gus handing the wrapped hamburger to the counter takes 45 seconds when it's going well and 55 when it isn't. The difference between 45 and 55 is not random. It correlates with the order volume. At very high volume, the board becomes a cognitive load, and reading it takes a fraction of a second longer, and those fractions add up. At very low volume, the timing between patties on the grill gets harder to maintain because there are gaps in the sequence. The sweet spot is the moderate high volume, when orders are coming in steadily enough that there are always patties at different stages on the grill, when the assembly station has a continuous flow of cooked patties arriving and a continuous flow of orders to fill, when the whole kitchen is moving at the pace it was designed for. At that moment, the speedy service system is operating as it was intended, and what it produces is not just a hamburger. It is a hamburger every 45 seconds, reliably, from a grill that is always at 375 degrees, and patties that are always 2 ounces, and a condiment sequence that is always the same, and a bun that comes from the same bakery to the same specifications, and a wrapping that looks the same whether it was done 5 minutes ago or 5 hours ago. This is what the McDonald brothers made. Not a hamburger, an argument about what a hamburger should be. And the argument was, it should be the same. Always the same, wherever you are. In San Bernardino in 1955, and in Chicago in 1960, and in Tokyo in 1971, and wherever else this system decides to go, which turns out to be everywhere. The summer of 1954, San Bernardino, Tuesday morning, late July. A car pulls into the parking lot at 1398 North E Street and parks. The driver sits in the car for a moment, looking at the building, looking at the line at the counter. Then he gets out. The end of the shift is its own particular experience, and it is not the experience you expected when you took the job. You expected that the end of the shift would be the thing you looked forward to. The moment when it's over, when the spatula goes down, when the apron comes off, and it is that. But it is also something else, something you didn't predict. It is disorienting to stop. The grill is still at 375. The patties are still in the walk-in. The order board is still getting marks on it, because the shift doesn't end because the restaurant closes. It ends because someone else comes in to take over, and you watch them take over. You watch the new person step to the grill with their own spatula, and there is a moment of passing the baton that is not ceremonial or acknowledged. It is just. The spatula transfers, and you move away from the heat. The heat is the thing you notice leaving. The front of your body, which has been in conversation with the grill for 8 hours, moves away from the heat source and the ambient temperature of the kitchen, which is not cool, which is a kitchen which runs warmer than outside, feels cold by comparison. Your body has recalibrated around 375 degrees, and now the baseline feels insufficient. You stand in the walk-through between the kitchen and the manager's office, and you're slightly cold for about 30 seconds until your body adjusts. You wash your hands. The soap takes 3 cycles to get the beef fat from your knuckles. The walk home takes 15 minutes. San Bernardino in the summer evening is warm and dry, and the smell of the orange groves, which the drive-in smell has been overwriting all day, comes back now that you are outside and moving through air that is not kitchen air. You notice the orange blossom smell the way you notice things when they've been absent, with a slight surprise, as if you'd forgotten it was possible. Your right wrist is saying something to you. It has been saying it since about hour 4, the specific ache of repetitive motion in the joint, and you've been managing it the way you manage the things your body says during work, acknowledging them without acting on them, filing them under. Deal with this later. Later is now. You flex the wrist, rotating it in the way that loosens the tension. The socket grinds slightly, which is new, which is the 3-month mark showing itself. Your feet you will not think about until you sit down, at which point they will begin their full debriefing. The arch, the ball, the heel, the particular point where the rubber mat has a seam that your left foot has been compensating for since the 2nd week. When you sit down, all of that deferred conversation will begin, and you will let it run because there is nothing else to do about it. You're 18 years old. In 45 years, you will be 63, and you will have done other jobs and lived other places, and the McDonald's at North E Street will be a museum, and nobody in San Bernardino will know that you worked here. What you will remember, and what will remain precise in the memory, when other things from this year have blurred, is the smell of the grill in the morning, the cold patties going down, the sizzle rising in pitch, the spatula finding the edge, not because it was wonderful, because it was exact, because you were part of something that required you to be precise, and precision has a way of carving itself into memory. The specific motion of the thing that was done correctly many times becoming available to recall in a way that the approximate things are not. The hamburger does not remember you. You will remember it. July 1954, San Bernardino, California. Raymond Albert Kroc is 52 years old, and he is not supposed to be here. He's supposed to be in a hotel in Sacramento meeting a restaurant supply manager about a new model of commercial blender. He is a milkshake machine salesman, the Prince Castle multi-mixer, capable of making 5 milkshakes simultaneously, and he's been selling milkshake machines across the American Midwest and West for 17 years, which is long enough to have very specific opinions about what a restaurant looks like from the outside, and what that appearance tells you about whether they will buy machines and whether they will pay their invoices. He has received an order from a restaurant in San Bernardino for 8 multi-mixers. Not 1, not 2, 8, which means they intend to make 40 milkshakes simultaneously, which is a number that implies a volume of business that Kroc, in 17 years of selling milkshake machines, has never encountered. He drives down from Los Angeles on a Tuesday morning to see it. He parks across the street and he sits in his car for a few minutes, because he is a man who has learned to look before he does anything else, and what he is seeing is worth looking at carefully. The restaurant is small, smaller than he expected. The white-painted cinder block building, the red and white trim, the big yellow arches on either side that function as the building's sign, the kitchen visible through the windows, visible like White Castle, like testimony rather than operation, and the line. The line is what he came to see, and the line is what he cannot stop looking at. 11 o'clock in the morning on a Tuesday, which is the slowest time and the slowest day in the restaurant business, The empty hours before the lunch rush when most restaurants are cleaning and prepping and keeping the lights on and waiting. And there is a line of people. 20 people in line. Some in cars, some on foot, some who appear to have come specifically rather than incidentally, who drove here instead of stopping somewhere closer, who chose this. Kroc gets out of his car. He crosses the street. He joins the line. He watches the window. The service is fast. He has watched lunch counter service for 17 years, and he knows what slow looks like and what medium looks like, and this is neither. The person at the window takes the order. The person at the assembly station is already moving before the order slip reaches the board. The waxed paper sandwich is in the bag before the customer has finished counting change. 30 seconds from order to bag, maybe 40. He orders a hamburger and a bag of French fries and a Coca-Cola, the fries. He has not been thinking about the fries, but when the paper bag appears through the window and the smell of the fries reaches him, potato, hot fat, salt, the specific urgency of fresh fried starch, he understands for the first time that the phrase may be as important as the hamburger. He takes his food to his car. He eats in the driver's seat with the window down and the July heat of San Bernardino coming in, and the sound of the parking lot around him, cars pulling in and out, the line still moving at the window, the operation continuing with the exact same rhythm he observed when he first pulled up. He eats slowly because he is not eating, he is analysing. The hamburger costs 15 cents, the fries cost 10, the Coca-Cola cost 10, 35 cents total. In 1954, 35 cents is accessible to essentially everyone in the American consumer population, including everyone who has driven past this building on North E Street today, including everyone who's ever driven past any building ever, which is a market that Kroc is beginning to understand is not a niche. He thinks, how many of these could there be? He is not thinking about San Bernardino. He has stopped thinking about San Bernardino. He's thinking about the highway, about the interstate highway system that Congress is about to authorize. The Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 is 2 years away, but the conversation is everywhere. The plans are public. The intention is clear. He is thinking about the American city that is spreading outward, the suburbs that are absorbing the returning veterans and their wives and their children, the new neighborhoods built around the car and the garage and the driveway, and the assumption that everything you need will be reachable by automobile. He is thinking, put one of these there, and there, and there, and there. He finishes the fries. They are still perfectly crisp. He thinks about that for a moment. Fresh fried potato has a window, 2 minutes, maybe 3, and then it goes soft and loses the thing that makes it worth eating. The fries from the bag are in a minute 1 of that window. Every customer who receives their bag from the window receives fries in minute 1 of that window, because the system produces them that fast. He goes back to the window and introduces himself to Dick McDonald. The conversation with the brothers takes most of the afternoon. He sits with them in a small office behind the kitchen, and they explain the speedy service system the way you explain something you've been thinking about for years to someone who is understanding it for the first time, which is beginning with the problems and arriving at the solutions. By evening, Kroc has a proposal. He wants to franchise the system. Not just the recipe, the system, the kitchen layout, the training protocol, the supplier relationships, the cleaning standards, the building specifications, the whole thing. Everywhere. The brothers are cautious. They have tried franchising. In 1952, they licensed the concept to a restaurant owner in Phoenix, who did not follow the specifications, who served only hamburgers and no milkshakes, who did not maintain the cleanliness standards, who did not reproduce the experience. What the Phoenix franchisee produced was a restaurant that called itself McDonald's and served mediocre hamburgers slowly. The brothers ended the relationship and retreated from the franchising idea. Kroc understands this problem. He has spent 17 years dealing with restaurant owners, and he knows the taxonomy. The operators who follow the manual, and the operators who improve on the manual, and the operators who have their own ideas that they are going to implement regardless of what the manual says. The franchise model, as the brothers understand it, is vulnerable to the third type. What Kroc is proposing is different. Not a license, a system with inspection and enforcement, and the withdrawal of the right to operate if the standards are not met. Because the standards are not suggestions. The standards are the product. He is 52 years old, which is an age at which most men in 1954 have made their major decisions. He has a salary. He has a house. He has a wife. He has a career that is not glamorous but is functional. The milkshake machine business is stable in the way of things that serve a reliable need. He is going to burn all of it down. He's going to bet everything. The savings, the house, the marriage in the end, his health, which is already not excellent, the replacement hip that is coming and the stomach surgeries that are coming, all of it, on the argument that the parking lot version of this experience can be reproduced everywhere. He negotiates the deal at 0.5% of gross revenue. He will later renegotiate, purchase the company outright, retire the brothers with a lump sum, and spend the rest of his life building the thing he saw on a Tuesday morning in July in San Bernardino. In 1955, the first McDonald's franchise opens in Des Plaines, Illinois. Kroc has selected the location deliberately, not California, where the car culture is already established, but the Midwest, where the suburb is newly forming, where the highway is coming, where the family in the station wagon is about to be the defining consumer unit of the next 30 years. The building is specific, red and white with the golden arches that curve up from the sides of the roof, which was Dick McDonald's design, originally meant as structural elements. Kroc sees them as something else, a sign that can be seen from the highway. Two curved lines of yellow neon that read from a passing car as "Here." The first Illinois McDonald's serves approximately 1,800 hamburgers a day. This is not enough. The scale Kroc is imagining requires numbers he will not reach in a year or 5 years, but which he can see from where he is standing. He is building toward a number that does not yet exist as a category. By 1958, there are 79 McDonald's restaurants. By 1960, there are 228. By 1963, the 1 billionth hamburger is served, with sufficient promotional ceremony to be noteworthy, which it is, because a billion of anything is noteworthy. But a billion hamburgers is the kind of number that changes how you understand what a hamburger is. A hamburger in 1963 is no longer a food category. It is an industrial output. It is a number on a production graph. Burger King opens in Miami in 1953, 1 year before Kroc's visit to San Bernardino, with the broiler instead of the grill, the flame instead of the flat top, the char that comes from cooking over direct heat rather than on a steel surface. Burger King's claim, the char. The flavour that comes from the outside of the patty meeting actual flame, a more complex browning, more bitterness in the crust. Wendy's opens in Columbus, Ohio in 1969. Dave Thomas's argument, fresh, not frozen. The square patty, which goes from corner to corner of the bun and visibly extends to the edge, a design choice that is partly practical and partly a claim. There is more beef here. You can see it. It is not hiding under the bun. The frosty, which exists in the space between a milkshake and a soft serve, thin enough to drink through a straw but only just, thick enough to eat with a spoon but only just, an indeterminate object that has a dedicated following for its indeterminacy, the Burger Wars. That is the name they will give the 1970s and 1980s, though the word war implies that the outcome was uncertain, which it was not. The battle was for the second-place customer, the customer who did not have a strong preference and would eat wherever was most convenient, which meant whoever had the most locations won the second-place customer, and whoever won the second-place customer in enough locations won in aggregate. McDonald's built the infrastructure first. The supply chains, the real estate, the training systems, the standardization. The other chains were building the same infrastructure faster, more cheaply, with the advantage of seeing what McDonald's had already done. The industry grew, and all of them grew inside it, and the growth was large enough that the sum of all of them was not the same sum as what any one of them would have been alone. By 1980, Americans eat more meals at fast food restaurants than at sit-down restaurants for the first time in history. This is not just a culinary fact, it is a fact about time. Americans in 1980 have less of it. The suburb requires commuting, which takes time. Two-income households are increasing, which means neither partner has the time that cooking a meal from ingredients requires. The convenience of the hamburger, 15 cents in 1948, $1 by 1975, but still the fastest food available at the most locations available, is meeting a need that the society has created. But something else is happening in the fields of Kansas and Nebraska and Iowa and Texas that you are not seeing from the parking lot. The Burger Wars. This is the name that business journalists in the 1980s give to the sustained competitive conflict between McDonald's and Burger King and Wendy's and the dozen smaller chains that are competing for position in the American fast food market. And the name suggests drama and uncertainty when the reality is somewhat less dramatic. McDonald's built the infrastructure first, the most locations in the most places, and the location advantage in fast food is the advantage that compounds and is difficult to close. Burger King's argument is different from McDonald's argument, not a competing version of the same argument. A genuinely different proposition. The broiler rather than the flat-top grill. The flame that contacts the patty directly, producing the char grill mark, the specific flavour of fat meeting direct flame, the slightly bitter quality at the edges of the beef where the heat has been highest. The tagline, "Have it your way." This is an explicit argument against McDonald's standardization. McDonald's makes the hamburger the same way every time. Burger King will make it your way. You can get it without pickles. You can get it without onions. You can have it adjusted to your specific preference, which is the opposite of the McDonald's proposition that the hamburger has been designed for maximum satisfaction of the maximum number of people, and is therefore not optimizable by the individual customer. Both arguments have their constituencies. The McDonald's customer who is not sure what they want, or who is in a hurry, or who is feeding a car full of children and needs a reliable minimum rather than a tailored maximum, McDonald's. The Burger King customer who has a specific way they like their hamburger and who has decided that the willingness of a restaurant to accommodate this preference is worth something, Burger King. Wendy's opens in Columbus, Ohio in 1969, and Dave Thomas's proposition is a third distinct argument. Fresh, not frozen. The square patty which goes corner to corner beyond the round bun, and can be seen to do so, which is a design choice that is both practical. More beef visible at the edge means more browning at the edge means more of the Maillard reactions that produce the most flavourful part of the patty. And argumentative. You can see the beef. It extends to the corners. There is no hiding in a round patty and a round bun. There is also the frosty, which is an object that has never quite committed to being either a milkshake or a soft serve, that exists in the space between them, that can be consumed through a straw only with sustained effort, and through a spoon only with patience, and that has a specific devoted following precisely because of its indeterminacy. The frosty is not trying to be two things at once. The frosty has decided that the boundary between two things is actually a third thing, and the third thing is specifically satisfying in a way that neither of the original two is. The scale of the industry by 1980 is the scale of an empire. An empire is not a metaphor. McDonald's operates in 32 countries. The Golden Arches are, according to a survey of global brand recognition, more recognizable than the Christian cross. Whether this is inspiring or alarming depends on your perspective, but it is the measurement of an extraordinary distribution of a single image across human cultures, and it is worth sitting with for a moment. A single image, two curved golden lines, read as an M by Americans, and as the representation of frying pan handles by some European observers, and as something else by observers in cultures with different visual histories. Everywhere it means hamburgers. Everywhere it means you know what you're going to get. Everywhere it means, yes, this is available here too, whatever country you're in, whatever distance from home you're standing. By 1986, McDonald's is in 45 countries. By 1995, it is opening a new restaurant every 5 hours, averaged across the year. By 2000, there are 30,000 McDonald's restaurants, serving 50 million customers daily in 120 countries. 50 million customers daily. This is not just a hamburger. This is the largest feeding operation in human history, conducted simultaneously across almost every country on Earth, executed in the 45-second window that Terry was working inside in San Bernardino in 1955. The people doing Terry's job in 2000 are doing exactly what Terry did. Spatula in hand, grill at 375, patties left to right, flip at 90 seconds, watch the order board, manage the sequence. There are hundreds of thousands of them, in 30 languages, in 100 climates, all performing the same motion, all wearing some version of the same uniform, all working inside a system that was designed in a parking lot in San Bernardino in 1948. This is what Kroc saw in the parking lot. Not the hamburger. The system. The reproducibility of the system. The fact that the system could be done by anyone who had been trained to do it, in any building that had been built to spec, in any city, in any country where the ingredients could be sourced to specification. The system turned out to be exportable to almost everywhere. Almost everywhere turned out to be most of the world. The highway at night in 1963 runs like a bright line through darkness. The asphalt is dry and the white lines at the centre divide the road into halves that disappear ahead of the headlights, into a blackness that produces, at highway speed, the specific sensation of moving towards something that is always ahead of you and never arrives. You're driving a 1961 Chevrolet Impala from Des Moines to Chicago, which is the drive you make 4 times a year for work, and which you have made enough times that your body knows the route in the way that bodies know things they have done many times. Not consciously, not with specific attention, but with a background awareness that notices when something is off without requiring you to think about what to notice. There is a child in the back seat. Your daughter, 8 years old. She was awake for the first 2 hours of the drive and has been asleep since somewhere around Moline. She's asleep in the way that children sleep in cars at night, completely without reservation, without the careful positioning of adults who know they'll have stiffness to manage in the morning. Just gone. Her head against the window, her mouth slightly open. You're not hungry. You ate before you left. But it is now 11 at night, and you've been driving for 3 hours and the car is warm and the darkness is hypnotic, in the specific way that darkness at highway speed is hypnotic, and your eyes are starting to want something to focus on that is not just the white line in the asphalt. You see the arc before you identify it. 2 curves of yellow light rising from the dark at the roadside, visible first as an impression. Something bright, curved, significant, before the car has covered the distance required to read them as an M, as a specific symbol you recognize, as the thing that the symbol means. You're 200 yards away when the identification clicks. You're 100 yards away when you decide. You take the exit. The McDonald's is on a spur road off the highway, one of the early exurban locations that Kroc has been building along the new interstate since 1958. The parking lot is smaller than the ones attached to the drive-ins in the cities. The building is the standard one, red and white. The arches on the sign separately lit. The interior visible from the parking lot. At 11 at night, there are 3 other cars. You get out of the car quietly so you don't wake your daughter. You go to the counter. You order a hamburger and a large Coke and a small bag of French fries for the remainder of the drive. The order takes 35 seconds. You eat the fries in the car in the parking lot because they are at their best right now, and you don't want to eat them while driving. The fry is one of the perfect foods at this temperature. Just off the peak of its cooking, still fully crisp, the potato inside still aerated and steaming, the salt distributed perfectly from the fryer oil. You eat them in the parking lot in the dark, the interior light of the car off so as not to wake your daughter, just the outside light from the golden arch coming through the windshield. She wakes up when you start the engine. "Where are we?" she says, blinking. "McDonald's," you say. She says nothing for a moment. Then, "Can I have some fries?" You give her the last few. She eats them without further comment and is asleep again before you reach the highway ramp. This is the American highway experience in 1963. The Golden Arch as landmark. The fry as the last thing before sleep. The location being neither here nor there but at the interchange, which is the American version of nowhere and everywhere simultaneously, the place the highway creates when it joins another highway, which is a place that did not exist before the highway and would not exist without it, which means the McDonald's at the interchange exists in the same sense that the interchange exists, as a consequence of a decision about how people should move. By 1963, you can drive from New York to Chicago on the interstate system and stop at a McDonald's every 150 miles. The arches are visible from the road. The experience inside each one is exactly the experience you had at the last one. The hamburger tastes the same. The fries come at the same temperature. The bag is folded the same way. The counter person says essentially the same things in the same sequence. This is the empire, not the gold, not the arch, the sameness. The certainty that at 2 a.m. on E80 in rural Illinois, when you are tired and your daughter has been asleep for 3 hours and you need something and there is an exit coming up, the certainty that what is at the exit is what you think it is, that it will be open, that it will serve you in the time you have, that it will taste the way you remember it, that you will not be surprised. The elimination of surprise is an extraordinary thing to build a business around. It seems like the lowest possible ambition. It turns out to be the thing that scales to 30,000 locations in 100 countries. What could be improved at a McDonald's in 1963 is almost everything. And that is not the point. The point is what stays the same. The spatula is in the hand. The grill is at 375. The patty is 2 ounces. The arch is visible from the highway. The feedlot is not a place that appears in the advertisement, which shows a sizzling patty and a golden bun, and perhaps a child's delighted face. The feedlot is several steps upstream of the advertisement, and several steps upstream of the kitchen on North E Street. And it smells specifically of what it is, which is cattle in concentration, thousands of animals in a relatively small space, eating a diet calibrated to produce rapid weight gain at minimal cost. The people who work in the meat packing plants where the cattle become patties are doing the most physically demanding and dangerous work in the supply chain. The line moves fast because the fast line is the profitable line. Injuries are not unusual. The workforce, which in the 1950s was heavily unionized and included significant numbers of long-term workers with benefits and reasonable pay, becomes, as the industry consolidates and plants move from urban centres to rural areas with lower labour costs and weaker unions, younger and more transient, often immigrant, often without the protections that union membership provides. None of this is visible from the counter at 1398 North E Street. None of this is what Ray Kroc was thinking about in his car in the parking lot in 1954, when he was watching the 45-second hamburger and understanding that the efficiency he was watching could be replicated everywhere. These are the things that are true at the same time, and the difficulty of holding them simultaneously is part of what makes the hamburger the complicated thing it actually is, underneath the simplicity of bread and beef and condiments. The hamburger is honest. It is what it says it is, a ground beef patty in a bun, with things on top that you can specify if you want. This is the original honesty of the thing, going back to Carl at the Hamburg docks and Charlie Nagrin pressing the meatball flat at the Outagamie County Fair. But the hamburger is also the product of a system that is too large for any one person to fully see, that has effects that extend far beyond the counter, that involves thousands of people doing difficult work that is invisible to the person at the end of the chain. Both of these things are true. The system that delivers the cheapest, fastest, most consistent hamburger in the history of human food is the same system that has organized the raising and killing and processing of beef at a scale that Karl from Württemberg could not have imagined and would not have recognized. The hamburger carries all of this within it, the same way it carries the flavor of the Maillard reaction, and the salt and the pickles, and the slight sweetness of the ketchup. The history is in the taste if you know how to read it. Most people eat it fast. That's always been the point. By the 1990s, the hamburger has begun to fragment in an interesting way. At one end, the fast food chains continue doing what they do, which is getting faster and larger and more precisely calibrated to the center of the distribution of American food preference. The menu expands back out from the 9 items the McDonald brothers reduced it to, because more items means more reason to visit, means more revenue per customer. The Big Mac appears in 1968, designed by a franchise owner named Jim Delegati in Uniontown, Pennsylvania, who wants something larger and more substantial than the standard burger. The Whopper at Burger King in 1957. The double-double at In-N-Out, which doubles everything and becomes the item by which serious hamburger people in California measure their commitment to the form. At the other end, something different. People who have eaten fast food hamburgers since childhood, who grew up knowing the golden arches from the back seat of the family station wagon, who can identify a McDonald's from a quarter-mile away in any American city, these people begin to want something the system cannot give them, which is specificity. Not the average of everyone. Something made for them, or at least made the way someone who cared about the making would make it. The craft burger movement of the late 1990s and 2000s is a reaction, not to the hamburger itself, but to the optimization. The craft burger restaurant opens in the neighborhood that has started calling itself upscale casual, the neighborhood where there is a yoga studio and a coffee place that talks about single origin, and a farmer's market on Saturday mornings. It describes the origin of its beef, the farm it came from, the breed of animal, the diet the animal ate. It grinds its meat in-house. It ages its buns from a local bakery. It costs $15. $15 for a hamburger is exactly 100 times what a McDonald's hamburger cost in 1955. Some of that is inflation. A significant portion of it is the cost of the story of where this came from, the story of the care that went into it, the story of the farmer and the breed and the diet, which is a story the 15-cent hamburger specifically refused to tell, because the 15-cent hamburger's story included parts that were not flattering. The two hamburgers exist at the same moment in time, in the same city, often within walking distance of each other. They are made of the same basic ingredients. They are eaten by different people who have different amounts of money and different ideas about what a hamburger should represent. And then there is the Impossible Burger, which appears in 2016, which is made of no beef at all. The Impossible Burger is a product of Impossible Foods, a company founded on the proposition that the meat industry's environmental footprint, the land, the water, the greenhouse gas emissions, is unsustainable, and that if you can reproduce the sensory experience of beef using plant proteins, you can address the problem without requiring anyone to stop eating hamburgers. The technical achievement is genuine. The scientist at Impossible Foods identified the specific molecule that gives beef its characteristic bloody, ferrous flavor. Heme, specifically a form called soy leghemoglobin, naturally occurring in the root nodules of soy plants. They produced it in quantity through fermentation, incorporated it into a plant protein matrix, added fats calibrated to melt at the same temperature as beef tallow, and produced something that, in blind tastings, a significant portion of people cannot reliably distinguish from beef. This is either a marvel of food science or an argument about the nature of authenticity, or both, depending on your position on the question of whether a hamburger that tastes like beef but contains no beef is a hamburger. Carl from the Hamburg docks in 1847, if you could somehow transport him to a restaurant in 2016 and serve him an Impossible Burger, would not have an opinion on the food science. He would taste it, and either agree that it was enough or disagree that it was enough. And the answer would depend entirely on whether it satisfied the original requirement. Does this give me what I need to get to the end of the shift? The requirement has not changed. The food changes. The requirement doesn't. Every hamburger ever made, from the minced beef on the Hamburg dockside to the Impossible Burger in a Silicon Valley test kitchen, is an answer to the same question. The question is, what do I eat when I need to eat now for not much money, something that gives me enough to keep going? The answers have gotten more complicated. more technologically sophisticated, more politically charged, more expensive in some cases, less expensive in others, more contested, more defended, more analysed, more symbolised. But the question is the same. It is the same question Carl asked, leaning against a piling in the cold harbour wind with the warm bread in his hands and the smell of fried beef and onion cutting through the brine. It is always the same question. That is the thing about empires. They are built on the same basic human requirements that everything else is built on. The requirement for food, the requirement for ease, the requirement for something warm at the end of the cold day that tells your body, yes, you will continue. Yes, you made it. The empire is enormous now. The beef industry at Anchors is among the largest agricultural systems in human history. The restaurants that serve it operate in 120 countries. The workers who make it number in the millions. The impact on land and water and climate is real and measurable and being measured. And at the foundation of all of that, as the base note beneath the enormity, a piece of ground meat in a piece of bread eaten standing up. That's what was there at the beginning. It's still there now if you look past everything that got built on top of it. The feedlot in the Texas Panhandle northwest of Amarillo holds 90,000 cattle. The smell arrives on the highway 3 miles before the feedlot is visible, and then the feedlot is visible, and the scale of it requires a few seconds to process, because the scale is not in any of the normal categories your brain uses to understand the size of things. 90,000 animals. They stand in pens of varying sizes, the animals at various stages of the process. Some just arrive from the grazing lands of the northern range, thinner, still carrying the look of cattle that have spent their lives walking distances, still adjusting to the confinement and the diet. Others have been here for months and show it in their heft, the cattle equivalent of the specific density that comes from weight gain at a controlled rate in a confined space. The weight gain is the product. The beef is secondary to the weight gain, which is the thing the feedlot sells to the packing house, which measures it in pounds per day of gain on specific inputs. The inputs are corn heavy, not because cattle evolved to eat corn. They evolved for grass, for the specific mix of grasses and forbs that the Great Plains used to grow in quantities that are now mostly irrigated cropland. But because corn is cheap and dense, and produces weight gain at rates that grass cannot match, a cow's digestive system evolved for grass, processing corn in quantity, produces the specific metabolic stress that creates the environment in which bacteria thrive in specific ways. This is managed with antibiotics, not therapeutic antibiotics given when an animal is sick. Subtherapeutic antibiotics given to all animals in the feed and water at low levels continuously, because at the density of a feedlot of 90,000 animals, bacterial infection without this management would be catastrophic. The antibiotics go into the water goes through the pens drain toward the waste lagoons at the south end of the property. The waste lagoons are visible from the highway. They are large, the colour of what collects in them, which is what the colour suggests, contained by earthen berms, evaporating slowly in the panhandle sun, contributing to the ambient smell that reaches the highway 3 miles away. This is agriculture at the scale required by a hamburger that cost $1.50. You do not see this in the advertisement. The advertisement shows a sizzling patty, a sesame seed bun, perhaps a slice of cheese going slightly molten at the edges from the heat of the patty. The advertisement is not lying. The patty does sizzle. The bun is sesame seeded. The cheese does go molten. The advertisement is showing you the downstream end of a process that begins in the panhandle and travels through packing houses and distribution centres and walk-in coolers before it arrives at the grill on North E Street. The packing house is a few hours away by truck. The trucks that carry cattle to the packing house leave the feedlot in the early morning, because the cattle need to arrive in a condition that the packing house can work with, which means not excessively stressed from heat and confinement and transport. Cattle arrive at the packing house by cattle truck. They enter the facility. What happens inside the facility is what most Americans would prefer not to know, and the industry has accommodated this preference by building the facilities away from population centres and by not discussing them in advertising. What happens inside is precise work. The disassembly of an animal into its component parts, performed by workers who stand at stations on a production line that moves the carcass past them at a rate determined by the throughput requirements of the facility, which are determined by the volume of product the facility needs to produce per hour to meet its contracts. The workers perform the same motions hundreds of times in an 8-hour shift. The motions require precision. A cut made incorrectly damages the product, reduces yield, creates waste that the facility calculates carefully, because waste is the enemy of the margin that allows the $1.50 hamburger to exist. The workers at the packing house in Garden City, Kansas, are overwhelmingly immigrants, or the children of recent immigrants. This is not coincidental. It is structural. The packing houses are located in small cities in rural states, far from the labour markets, that provide alternatives. The work is available when other work is not, and the companies have historically recruited workers from communities where available carries more weight than desirable, which is most communities, which is why the workforce in these plants has reflected across the decades the current immigration pattern. German and Irish immigrants in the 19th century, Eastern European immigrants in the early 20th, Hispanic and Central American workers in recent decades, with Vietnamese and Somali and Burmese workers in the facilities that opened or expanded in the 1990s. They are not in the advertising. They are in the hamburger in the specific way that invisible labour is always in a product. You eat it, and you are sustained by it, and the people who made it are not part of the experience of eating it, because the design of the supply chain requires that they not be part of the experience of eating it. Their work and the product of their work are separated by every step of the distribution system, the refrigerated trucks and the walk-in coolers and the waxed paper wrapper that you put down on the tray or throw in the bag's paper napkin and then into the trash. This is not incidental, it is designed. Not designed with malice, or not primarily with malice. Designed with the logic of a system that is optimized for cost and volume and reliability, and the cost of a $1.50 hamburger requires the labor to cost as little as the law allows, because the law allows costs to be low, and the margin requires them to be low, and the customer requires the price to be low, and all three of these requirements point to the same conclusion. The people in the middle take on the risk that the system does not want to carry. The workers in the packing houses have the highest injury rate of any American industrial occupation, not because they are careless, because precision work performed at speed with edge tools on a moving line produces injuries at a specific rate, and the rate is what it is, and the injury is reported and the treatment is managed, and the worker returns or the worker does not return, and the station is filled, and the line continues, and still, the hamburger at the end of all of this is still good. This is the fact that does not resolve. You can know the feedlot and the packing house and the labour and the antibiotics in the groundwater and the carbon footprint of the cattle industry, which is measurable and has been measured and is significant and is being contested by various parties with various interests. And you can still be hungry, and the hamburger can still be the answer to the hunger, and the first bite can still produce the experience that Karl Bauer had at the Hamburg docks in 1847. Fat and salt and bread and meat, and the specific warmth of something that answers a question your body was asking. All the complexity exists, all the pleasure exists, both of them at the same time, in the same mouthful. This is not a resolution, it is the condition. The Impossible Burger and the Beyond Burger and all the plant-based burger products that appear in the 2010s are doing something specific to the taxonomy of the hamburger. And the thing they are doing is this. They are separating the hamburger from its ingredient. For 170 years, the hamburger was beef, ground beef, pressed flat, cooked on heat. That combination, this specific protein from this specific animal, prepared in this specific way, was what the word meant. You could argue about the fat content and the grind and the temperature and the bread and the condiments, but the beef was not an argument. The beef was the beginning. The Impossible Burger says, what if the beef is not the beginning? What if the beef is a delivery mechanism for a set of properties? The colour, the texture, the flavour, the way fat renders in heat, the specific molecule that makes beef smell like beef when it cooks. And those properties can be reproduced by other means. This is an engineering question, and Impossible Foods answers it with engineering. The heme molecule from soy, the plant proteins textured to mimic ground beef's specific fibrous structure. The coconut oil that melts at the same temperature as beef tallow, producing the same fat migration into the bread that Karl Bauer would have recognized at the Hamburg piling in 1847. When the Impossible Whopper arrives at Burger King in 2019, the plant-based patty in the standard Whopper configuration, at a price point close to the beef version. The reaction splits between two camps. The camp that finds the distinction between plant and beef important for reasons of taste preference or principle, and the camp that honestly cannot tell the difference in a blind tasting, which is a larger camp than anyone expected. The hamburger has, in its history, absorbed every change that was applied to it. The change from Hamburg-style patty to American-style patty. The change from plate food to hand food. The change from ethnic food to national food. The change from restaurant food to drive-through food. The change from beef you knew was local to beef you know nothing about. The plant-based burger is one more change in a long series of changes, and the hamburger has always survived its changes by remaining recognizable at the level of the sensory experience. The weight in the hand, the warmth through the paper, the yield of the protein between the teeth, the salt and the fat and the bread. Whether the beef inside is grass-fed local cattle, or feedlot corn-finished cattle, or soy protein extruded into the shape of ground beef, the experience, at the level of the hand and the mouth, is recognizably the same experience. Karl Bauer would not have understood the Impossible Burger. He would have eaten it and either agreed or disagreed with his body that it was enough. And his body, the hungry body of a 22-year-old dock worker at the end of an 11-hour shift in Hamburg in 1847, would have applied a very specific and unambiguous test. Does this give me what I need to get to the end of the day? The Impossible Burger was designed to pass this test. Whether it does is the question that billions of dollars of food science and marketing and agricultural disruption are currently attempting to answer in real time in every Burger King and Whole Foods and Company cafeteria that is serving it. The hamburger waits for the verdict with the patience of something that has been through quite a lot already. the craft burger arrives as a reaction. In the early 2000s and accelerating through the 2010s, a different kind of hamburger appears in cities. The Shake Shack in Madison Square Park in 2004 begins as a hot dog cart and becomes, within 3 years, the line that people wait in for 40 minutes, not because they have no alternative, but because they have decided this particular hamburger is worth it. The line. The craft burger's central argument is specificity, grass-fed rather than feedlot, from a named farm in a named county, dry-aged to develop the flavour compounds that aging produces, cooked medium rare in the way that other ground beef cannot safely be cooked, because the grinding process distributes surface bacteria through the interior, but which this beef, single-sourced, processed with the care that single sourcing allows, can sustain. The bun is brioche because brioche is what happens to bread when you add butter and egg, and let the enriched dough develop slowly. It is softer than standard bun, richer, slightly sweet in a way that plays against the salt of the beef and the bitterness of the aged cheddar. The price is $14. This is not a contradiction of the McDonald's hamburger. It is a parallel universe that has always existed within the same taxonomy. The best food in any category costs more, and is more specifically made, and is available to fewer people. The cheapest food in any category costs less, and is produced by the most efficient system available, and feeds more people. Both things are hamburgers. The word contains the entire spectrum. The Impossible Burger arrives in 2016. Hemi-iron extracted from soy plants, engineered to perform the function that the iron in beef myoglobin performs. The binding and release of oxygen that produces the specific brown-pink transition of beef cooking, and the release of the specific volatile compounds that make cooking beef smell the way it does. Impossible Food's core insight. The thing people mean when they say they want a hamburger is mostly a sensory profile. The feel of the patty in the hand, the sizzle, the smell, the way the fat runs into the bottom bun, the specific give of ground protein between the teeth. If you can reproduce the sensory profile without the cow, you have reproduced the hamburger. Whether what you have produced is a hamburger is a question that the word is not yet equipped to answer, and will be debating for some time. What is certain, when the Impossible Burger appears at Burger King in 2019 as the Impossible Whopper, the line at Burger King drive-thrus is longer than it has been in a decade. The hamburger's ability to contain everything, the immigrant food and the industrial food and the premium food and the plant-based food and the fast food and the slow food, without ceasing to be recognizable as itself, is the thing that has made it the central food of American life. It adapts, it absorbs, it reflects back at you whatever you need it to mean: comfort, convenience, celebration, guilt, pleasure, politics, identity. You can eat a McDonald's hamburger and feel you are eating America. You can eat a Shake Shack burger and feel you are eating something different from America, something that has thought about America carefully and suggested an improvement. You can eat an Impossible Burger and feel you're eating the future. You can grill one in a backyard on a Saturday afternoon and feel you're eating exactly what a Saturday afternoon in a backyard is supposed to feel like, which is not complicated, not historically situated, not part of a supply chain, just the smell and the sizzle and the bun warming in the foil and the cold beer in the other hand. All of those experiences are real. All of them are happening in the same country, inside the same taxonomy, from the same basic arrangement of ground beef and bread. The room is quiet. Wherever you are, It has gotten later. The sounds outside have changed to the sounds that nighttime makes, which are not the absence of the day sounds but a different register of them, slower, with more space between. The Hamburger's long history is still in the room, all of it. Karl at the Hamburg piling, the Johanna working through the North Sea with everyone sick and dreaming of food, the brass band at the Outergamey County Fair wandering away from the waltz, Billy Ingram's white walls and the bleach smell that meant, trust this. The streamers in the San Bernardino parking lot and the McDonald brothers walking through the ideal sequence over and over until it became obvious. Ray Kroc in his car, understanding. Terry at the grill at 7 a.m, laying the cold patties down one by one into the heat. It is all still there, in the same past where it has always been, permanent and complete, and unable to be changed, which is both the consolation and the particular sadness of history. It happened. It is finished. The people in it made their choices, and the choices had their consequences, and now we are in the consequences, and the past is the past. But the Hamburger is still here. Tonight, somewhere within a few miles of wherever you are, there is a grill at 375 degrees, and a person flipping a 2-ounce patty, and a line of people who are hungry and need something fast and filling. The sequence that the McDonald brothers worked out in a parking lot in 1948 is still being executed right now, in this very hour, in this very minute. It does not stop because you are trying to sleep. It does not stop because anything is happening or not happening anywhere. It simply continues, the way systems continue when they have been built to be durable, which is, without drama, without declaration, one hamburger at a time. Let that settle now. Let the whole of it, the Hamburg harbour and the county fair and the white walls of the first white castle and the golden arches visible from the highway, let it all move back from the centre of your attention to somewhere further back, the way things move when you're very tired, from the front of your mind where they have been demanding engagement to somewhere behind, somewhere quieter, where they can exist without requiring anything from you. You do not have to hold the Hamburger's history. It holds itself. It has been holding itself since 1847, and it will continue to hold itself long after tonight. Your only job right now is to stop holding it, to let your hands open in the metaphorical sense, and let the story rest where it fell. The bed beneath you is doing what beds do, which is hold your weight exactly, not struggle, not strain, simply receive. The mattress has adjusted to you. The blanket is at the right temperature, or close to it, which your body will continue calibrating through the night as you stop generating the warmth of consciousness and shift to the different metabolism of sleep. Your breathing is already slower than it was when this started. Notice that. The breathing that is already slower. Your body knows. Your body started making adjustments some time ago, the heart rate easing down from the day's various requirements, the muscle tension releasing in stages, the jaw unclenching the way jaws do when they've been held tight all day and finally remember they can stop. The sounds of the day are filed now. Whatever you were thinking about before Karl and the Hamburg harbour and the 45-second hamburger, those things are still there, in their proper places, available when you need them, which will not be until morning. They do not need you to hold them tonight. They will be where you left them. Centuries will pass, have already passed. The harbour in Hamburg looks nothing like what it looked like in 1847. The Gängeviertel was largely demolished in the 20th century. The Johanna is at the bottom of some ocean. or rather is atoms distributed in the water and the sediment and the small organisms that have been consuming it since it went down whenever it went down. The county fair in Outagamie County still happens every year, and they celebrate Charlie Green, and you can get a hamburger there that is either the original or a descendant of the original, depending on your philosophy of identity. The McDonald's on North E Street in San Bernardino is gone. The original building was replaced decades ago. There is a historical monument at the site. People visit. The chain remains. And the people who come after us, whenever they come, whatever they eat, whatever form the answer to the question of what do I eat fast and cheap and filling takes in their time, they will be answering the same question. The question does not change. The answer changes. The question is old. The question is older than the hamburger, older than Germany, older than the word for what you feel when you are hungry and the day is long. Some things don't change. The need for rest doesn't change. The relief of something warm at the end of the hard day doesn't change. The comfort of lying down when you are tired, knowing that the night is here and the day is finished and you have done what you needed to do, and now you can stop. That has not changed since the first human being lay down after the first long day and let the darkness come. Let it come now. Let sleep take you the way it always takes you, eventually, when you have stopped holding things tightly enough that your hands can open. Let the warmth of the bed continue doing what it has been doing while you listened, which is waiting for you to arrive fully in it. Let the hamburger's history go. Let Carl lean against his piling forever, with the best thing he's had in months going warm in his hands, and the harbour dark around him, and the whole Atlantic between him and what comes next. Let the Johanna move through the North Sea with everyone dreaming of food. Let Charlie Green press the meatball flat and change nothing and everything at the same time. Let the golden arches catch the last of the evening light on 1,000 highway exits across the country, visible from a quarter mile in either direction, saying, "You know this, you're here, you're fed." Let all of it be exactly what it was. You're warm enough, fed enough, rested enough. You have a roof and a bed and a night ahead of you where nothing is required. That's more than Carl had on the Johanna. That's more than a great many people across a great many nights have had. That is enough. Let your eyes stay closed. Let the breathing slow one more time, just slightly, just enough to feel it. The deliberate step into the next stage of the night. The day is done. The history is where it belongs. You are where you belong. Good night.